Luxury and sophistication are what await visitors to this elite restaurant. In the bustle of the busy hall, orders multiply, but one table stands out among the others. A sudden rumble interrupts the measured work of the kitchen. Tension rises as the chefs exchange worried glances. Even the most experienced chef, focused on his art, cannot ignore this chaos. Whispers and puzzled questions fill the space, but what is happening behind the door? The head chef, keeping his cool, tries to grasp the essence of what is happening through the interference. But reality catches up with him in the form of an alarming message on his phone, news from a completely different world. The chef's gazes are directed into the depths of the kitchen, where the figure of their leader looms. He seems to have made up his mind, and his movements become precise and decisive. Every step he takes sounds like a sentence, filled with unwavering will. And here's the reason for the commotion. A group of suspicious men, led by a smug boss, burst into the Holy of Holies. Their grins do not bode well, and the bosses freeze in anticipation. An open briefcase filled to the brim with bills leaves no doubt about their intentions. His grin widens, exuding a mixture of superiority and insolence. But the chief does not flinch. A blade flashes in his hand, ready for the inevitable fight. Fear freezes in the eyes of one of the cooks, sensing trouble. The chief's gaze is piercing and cold. His determination is tempered with steel. The kitchen turns into a battlefield where honor clashes with brute force. The boss's malicious laughter echoes throughout the room, but who will emerge victorious from this duel? And so, in the chef's hands, a blade shines, ready for a fight, but not a culinary one. However, this confrontation caught even the most cunning players off guard. The boss, enjoying the moment, just grins, anticipating the spectacle. The observers watch the scene with undisguised amazement until one of them retreats into the shadows. Off to the side, other chefs seem to be trying to escape the oppressive atmosphere. One of them blows a smoke ring, his gaze wandering, searching for an answer. But behind this apparent nonchalance, there seems to be a deep understanding. His thoughts are interrupted. A premonition of change is born in his soul. A sudden ringing, like a bell, pierces the silence of the night. The vibration in his pocket, like a harbinger of a new intrigue, calls him to itself. A mysterious message flickers on the phone screen, promising a continuation of a long-forgotten story. His face contorts in surprise as a familiar yet disturbing melody plays from the speaker. The game's splash screen features a familiar image, enticing you to touch the digital world. While his mind is lost in thought, the game persistently reminds him of its presence. A spark lights up in his eyes, illuminating a determination that changes everything. The neighbor, noticing the change, cautiously looks out from behind the door, full of questions and concerns. The phone falls out of his hands, its glow filling the space with a mysterious light. The strange glow of the device envelops the kitchen in a mysterious aura. Attracted by the unusual phenomenon, another one approaches, and both freeze in anticipation. A final message appears on the phone screen, transfer 100% complete. The digital portal is open. The game world, full of excitement and fear, is ready to welcome a new player. Images of those who are waiting for him on the other side of the screen unfolded before him. A vast world where every step promises a new adventure. Abel von Nibelung's gaze pierces the invisible boundary, but suddenly a sharp collision brings him back to reality. The everyday life of the city swallowed him up again, cold and indifferent. A moment later, the world around is shaken by an unexpected blow. His vision blurs, shock taking him out of his usual train of thought. A confused look in aquamarine eyes and an anxious question. The underworld moves at its own pace, and the hero makes a decision. At the station, he gets off, stepping onto an unfamiliar path. The elevator takes him up to the 14th floor, to the unknown. The access code opens the door to a new stage in his life. A gloomy group and a nervous smile greet him at the threshold. The irony of fate is reflected in his eyes, foreshadowing something more than he expected. He sank heavily into a chair, realizing the weight of what had happened. But deep down in his soul, an unshakable determination is growing. My gaze falls on an old photo, and a voice in my head whispers, "This is all because of you." Every smile in this picture is a sign of his future trials. The accusations, unspoken but palpable, weigh on him like an invisible weight. But among the pile of papers he finds another destiny, a foreign name, Kon Kama. And at that very moment, in another dimension, divine light pours out upon the world, heralding a great awakening. An ancient power awakens, clothing an unknown hero in shining armor, ready for battle. Every shield, every blow is now woven from pure, primordial energy. Generations of heroes gather, their silhouettes melting in the pre-dawn haze, guided by some higher will. The gaze of one meets the gaze of the other, and an unspoken promise hangs in the air like the seal of fate. But these vivid visions are replaced by a sharp flash of awareness that pierces his tormented consciousness. The world is ablaze with crimson flames, under the yoke of monstrous forces that threaten to devour all that exists. Legions of darkness rise from the depths, their unholy cries tearing at the skies, heralding the inevitable. He tries to escape from the nightmares, plunging into an endless routine, hoping to find salvation. But fatigue and the burden of responsibility do not let go, forcing him to seek answers in the empty silence. And suddenly, in the midst of the darkness, a spark of thought flares up, foreshadowing something important that will change his fate. His gaze is drawn to the flickering lines, to the code that could be the key to everything. God's blessing, perhaps? His name and the divine principles seem incompatible. But a cold, analytical light ignites in his eyes, reflecting a deep, hidden connection. With disbelief and annoyance, he points to the data dancing before him on an invisible screen. And, somewhere in another dimension, a sharpened blade awaits its time, symbolizing both mastery and retribution. And all this burden, all these insights fall upon him, breaking out as a cry of despair and pain. Exhausted, he leans back, looking at the ceiling where, it seems, there are no answers to his questions either. But it is there, in the emptiness of the ceiling, that something begins to flicker. The world around him distorts, and a blinding vision appears before Abel's eyes. He tries to make sense of this stream of images that is squeezing his mind. A new, frighteningly cold fire flashes in his gaze, and a growl appears on the lips, as if something ancient is awakening. Finally, Abel stands up, stepping into the bottomless glow towards the unknown. He turns around, and there is a strange, almost devilish grin in his eyes. Before us is no longer the same young man, but someone else, in a strict school uniform full of hidden strength. A new beginning also foreshadows new conflicts. Here he is, the opponent, with his face distorted with anger. Energy hovers around them, sealed in scrolls, ready to release their power. In the center of this whirlwind of anticipation, Abiel and his new enemy lock eyes without saying a word. The man, whose name has not yet been released, looks at him with undisguised menace. As if wanting to tear apart space, he throws out his hand, filled with pure, destructive power. However, Abel meets this show of force with an unperturbed, even slightly mocking calm. The opponent is confused, his confidence is shaken, and his anger only increases. Rage overwhelms him, bursting from the depths of his soul in a rolling, almost animalistic cry. Abel only looks down, a spark of understanding and anticipation flickering in his eyes. In response, something ancient flashes in his enemy's eyes, promising only pain and destruction. But even this primal rage seems unable to shake Abel's resolve. That same, barely noticeable but piercing smile plays on his lips again. Abel looks into the eyes of the approaching threat, his smile not wavering, only growing sharper in anticipation of what is to come. He exudes a strange calm, as if all this commotion around him has nothing to do with him, but only confirms his calculations. At this moment, Kaling Siegfried von Nibelung rushes forward like an ancient warrior, ready to tear the enemy apart with unbridled fury. His face is distorted with rage and despair. Every muscle is tense to the limit, and fire blazes in his eyes. Among the crowd of people gathered around the check-in counter, Abel calmly waits for his turn, without showing even a hint of anxiety. His gaze glides over those around him, but doesn't linger on anyone, and his hands mechanically adjust the strap of his bag, hiding his true intentions. Tension hangs in the air, reflected in the wary looks of the other students, who sense an inevitable clash. And now Klingus, i.e. Jeffried von Nibelung, is already in front of him, his thunderous cry filling the space, demanding an answer. Abel finally loses his composure, a mixture of surprise and annoyance appearing on his face, as if the intrusion had interrupted important thoughts. For a moment, the scene changes, and we see the majestic vaults of the academy under a clear sky, contrasting with the chaos within. Under this sky, Abel sits on a bench, his posture expressing complete exhaustion, as if the battle had already taken all his strength. But deep within his eyes, a spark of determination lights up again, casting a shadow of the old fatigue and readiness for a new challenge. The promenades and Gothic towers look on silently, becoming witnesses to his thoughts. Abel is again lost in his thoughts, his gaze directed somewhere into the distance, trying to put together the fragments of what happened. It seems he found here a brief moment of calm after a stormy battle, or just a respite before the next act of the drama. His hands, however, are not idle, taking something out of the bag, something that could change the course of events. A small smile touches his lips again as he raises the small but sharp blade, as if preparing for a new game. The thought of an adopted habit flashes through his mind, one that belongs to someone else but has now become part of himself. Slowly, carefully, he runs his thumb over the polished steel, enjoying the cool touch. And his gaze, sharp as the blade itself, reflects unwavering concentration and cold determination, ready to crush any opponent. Abel von Nibelung braces himself, his gaze fixed on an invisible point, his hands habitually gripping the hilt. And now the blade comes to life, flaring with bright, heavenly energy, as if an ancient power had awakened in its heart. The world around Abel distorts, pulsing red and blue, and he himself seems consumed by the chaos. His face, calm just a second ago, now betrays growing anxiety as it plunges into a whirlpool of digital distortion. Abel's eyes, wide open from an unknown shock, fill with a fiery color, reflecting the internal storm. Red lightning bolts shoot from the blade, piercing his body as the power takes hold of him, turning him into the epicenter of the disaster. He soars into the scarlet sky, surrounded by sparkling fragments and pulsating energy, like a puppet in the hands of someone against his will. Bewilderment and slight fear are reflected in his gaze as Abel tries to comprehend the scale of the collapse happening around him. His hand holds the blade tightly, as if it were the only thread connecting him to a reality that is about to shatter. But suddenly, the scarlet whirlwind gives way to a blinding blue, and Abel von Meibling is transported to a new, frighteningly unfamiliar world. There's a mix of confusion and wariness in his eyes as he scans his surroundings, trying to figure out where he's been thrown. He stands on a sunlit street, his head slightly tilted, his brows drawn together in mild bewilderment at what he sees. A sudden attack burns him. AB clutches his temples, his face distorted by a grimace of acute pain. Something is pressing on him, as if an invisible hand is squeezing his consciousness, pulling out a scream that cannot escape. His open palm trembles, stretched forward, either in an attempt to stop an invisible threat or pleading for help. The blade lies at his feet, and Abel, von Nibelung himself stands, exhausted, having lost his footing. He is silent, trying to collect his thoughts, to make sense of this whirlwind of events that have fallen upon him without warning. Slowly, with effort, Abel bends down, his hand reaching for his trusty blade as if seeking solace in its steel. And now the blade is in his hands again. A slight surge of strength returns, giving him a piece of his former determination. But a sudden, powerful electric shock pierces his body, throwing Abel to the ground amid the horrified screams of onlookers. The events unfold in a majestic arena, buzzing with an unusual crowd. Among them are people full of self-satisfaction and anticipation, clearly not ordinary spectators. Laughter and joyful excitement fill the air as familiar faces exchange jokes. But even amidst this outward gaiety, there is a hidden intrigue lurking in some eyes. High above the arena sits King Siegfried von Nibelung, his presence inspiring both respect and fear. His gaze reveals deep wisdom and an unwavering, almost stern determination. The tension mounts, and even outside observers begin to feel the gravity of the moment. Kling looks down, his thoughts hidden behind a mask of calm. And nearby, the radiant Chloe auditor radiates her inimitable energy, seemingly oblivious to the escalating drama. But even her light cannot dispel the shadow that has fallen on Kling's brow, hiding his true feelings. Two figures, two poles of emotions, sit side by side, watching the events unfold. Kling's stern gaze meets Chloe's light, almost conspiratorial smile. She theatrically covers her mouth, as if holding back a laugh, hiding her true intentions. And then her smile widens, taking on a hint of anticipation of something irreversible. The stands offer a panoramic view of the arena, where the crowd awaits the outcome, and Chloe utters only a mysterious sound. Her gaze, now devoid of its former carefreeness, glides over the field, analyzing every element. Kling doesn't take his eyes off what's happening, tensely awaiting the next move. Below, among the general public, a group of students are discussing the future, one of them full of self-confidence and confidence. In the center of attention, alone, stands Abel von Nibelung, surrounded by curious glances. "Is this really the same black-haired stranger they've been talking about so much?" the spectators whisper, looking at him. While the other students watch the scene with barely concealed tension, everyone seems to be ready for battle. But all these glances only glide over Abel, whose eyes, deep as the night sky, hold a secret and a steely determination. The crowd comes to life as a figure appears ahead, like a ghost from legend, causing the air to thicken with anticipation. And even Abel, usually imperturbable, feels a slight chill of foreboding reflected in his startled gaze. The whispers grow louder, and now several students are pointing out what is coming, their faces distorted with a mixture of surprise and alarm. Abel turns and looks down gloomily as the entire room seems to light up, heralding the arrival of something significant. And here she is, Rachel Demore, bright as the dawn, stepping into this world, bringing with her an aura of unwavering strength and a razor-sharp blade. Her aquamarine hair is like a waterfall, and her eyes, the color of molten gold, pierce the space, never doubting their purpose for a second. It seems as if fate itself is reaching out, whispering, "Here, this is where a new chapter begins." And at that moment the air around is electrified, anticipating the clash of forces that are about to burst into a blinding whirlwind. Meanwhile, watching the spectacle from afar, sit Sick, Kling, Siegfried von Nibelung, and KLOE Auditor, their eyes full of expectation. They know that this is not just a demonstration, but a brutal test where everyone will be judged by one criterion: survival. Kaling, with his unshakable wisdom, frowns approvingly, while CHLOE already seems to be anticipating a gripping plot. "Don't even mention how difficult it was to reach that compromise," CHLOE says to Colling, whose face reflects the weariness of the behind-the-scenes intrigue. They, the arbiters of fate, observe what is happening from the height of their position. Every gesture of the young fighters is carefully analyzed. But on Abel's face, in his flushed cheeks, a sudden embarrassment appears, as if he saw something that made his heart beat faster. And Rachel, without breaking stride, passes through the crowd, and every glance, every breath around her is evidence of her magnetic influence. "Maybe if I didn't know everything, I would have reacted the same way," Abel muses, watching her walk casually past. She continues to walk forward, not noticing the curious glances, immersed in her thoughts and anticipation of the upcoming fight. But then, as if a mask falls, a mischievous smile appears on her face as Rachel meets the gaze of a certain companion who shares her secret, their hands intertwined. The grand amphitheater welcomes new participants, each bringing their own hopes and secrets. Among them, side by side, walks Rachel, her presence felt, although Abel's gaze slides past her for now. The young man, detached like a shadow, is immersed in the study of an ancient treatise that promises to reveal all the paths of fate. Its pages contain myths about heroes, fabulous wealth, and great glory, but all of this seems far from its reality. After all, behind every feat lies an incurable trauma, and even the thought of a weapon makes him tremble uncontrollably. With a slight, barely perceptible smile, Abel closes the book, as if brushing aside other people's ideals and prejudices. He looks up, a spark of anticipation lighting up his eyes. Here we go. In the center of the arena, illuminating the space, a mysterious crystal pulsates, the gateway to the trials to come. From the stands, K. Ling, Siegfried von Nibelung, and KLOE Auditor watch with bated breath, their faces expressing mixed feelings. And on the field, full of unspoken energy, stands Rachel Demore, her gaze as bright and determined as the turquoise of her hair. Around her are other competitors, their faces reflecting a whole range of emotions, from confidence to hidden tension. Abel stands aside, his gaze still calm, but deep in his eyes there is something more than just indifference. Suddenly, the space explodes with a blinding radiance, and blue sparks rush in all directions. Participants find themselves within a whirlwind of pure power, each standing on the threshold of their own destiny, preparing to step into the unknown. And then, Abel, surrounded by a purple aura, stands up to his full height, his movements emitting incredible, hidden power. Under the pressure of this force, the other contenders fall prostrate, their will broken before the sword has even left its scabbard. Up above, CHLOE, the auditor shares her observations with Kling as the arena empties, as if awaiting the next act. "You'll jinx it," Kaling says quietly as CHLOE gestures to a holographic screen full of data. A silhouette of Raquel appears on it, her features revealing incredible potential waiting to happen. CHLOE smiles, pointing to the projection where Rachel Demora appears in all her glory, her eyes shining with the promise of great things to come. But Kaling Siegfried von Nibelung seemed to see more than just a projection. His gaze was full of stern foresight. He seemed to be listening to CHLOE's worries, but his posture revealed an unyielding will, ready for the most decisive actions despite the fears. Rising from his seat, Kaling cut a monumental figure, and CHLOE, though still seated, shared his tension as if sensing trouble. The sage Siegfried presses his lips together, and in CHLOE's eyes there is an ominous gleam, foreshadowing not just the future, but an approaching storm. Below, in the arena, people gather, their faces full of anticipation, fear, and silent questions about the coming test. CHLOE desperately tries to get something across, but Kling seems to have already made his decision, and his gaze is unwavering, fixed on one point. And so, a wave of energy spreads across the arena, causing shadows to dance and foreshadowing a powerful, uncontrollable intervention. Something shocking unfolds before them, causing Chloe to scream in horror while Filling just narrows his eyes, trying to comprehend. With a commanding hand, Ling commands, and a red flash descends upon the arena, causing Chloe to recoil from the power he has summoned. But suddenly, something doesn't go according to plan. Chloe's eyes reflect complete bewilderment, and Keeling doesn't hide his amazement. Panic is growing among the spectators, their looks full of confusion, because what is happening goes beyond any expectations. The earth cracks open with a roar, and from its depths erupts an uncontrollable blue energy, a harbinger of true chaos. An ancient, primordial power flashes in the depths of his golden eyes, and a bead of sweat on his temple betrays the colossal tension. Chloe finally finds her voice, her protest full of fury, but Kling stands firm, his will tempered like steel despite everything. A sudden flash of light blinds, as if the sky itself has opened up to reveal its angry and destructive power to the world. One of the warriors is caught by this force. His body is pierced by pain, his face is distorted by a grimace of agony, he is helpless. The arena turns into a battlefield where fallen warriors lie motionless, witnesses to a sudden and devastating catastrophe. Abel von Nibelung, shocked by what is happening, clenches his jaw, a fire of furious determination flashes in his eyes. He stands among the ruins, majestic and defiant, his figure illuminated by the light of readiness for his decisive battle. Without mercy, he grabs his opponent, throwing him to the floor while others already lie defeated, capturing the end of chaos and its beginning. His gaze is tense, his hand in the fighting glove is clenched, foreshadowing the coming fight, but the fate is already predetermined. Seized by a powerful hand, he is mercilessly thrown to the floor, and around him lie his fallen comrades. Horror and rage distort his face as the realization of helplessness pierces his mind. A mighty silhouette towers over him, leaving behind only charred traces of triumph. "Four down!" rings through the air as the victor triumphantly surveys the battlefield where he alone remains standing. Off to the side, Kankama watches the proceedings with her arms crossed, her gaze full of wariness. A sudden shock overwhelms another warrior, who only now realizes the scale of the new threat. His face is contorted with determination and anger, every muscle tense in anticipation of the inevitable confrontation with this chaos. Rising, the fallen warrior joins his powerful foe, and now they walk together, Kankama following them. The former prisoner's face expresses complete amazement, as if he had just come across an incredible discovery. Next to Kankama, whose face is frozen in a sinister grin, the warrior in the red glove looks menacing. The blue-suited opponent's gaze becomes malicious, anticipating a new game. A mad laugh escapes his lips as the energy around his glove begins to pulse ominously, ready to attack. In the center of the ruined arena, like a last hope, stands a dark-haired hero against whom all three are lined up. Anger blazes in his eyes, and his face shows shock at this sudden and dangerous union. Both of them, having joined forces, look at him with arrogant confidence, knowing their superiority. Sly grins play across their faces, foreshadowing a brutal reprisal. The warrior in the red glove makes a threatening gesture, directing powerful energy directly at him. "Understood?" rings out above him as the enemy looks down, declaring the end of his resistance. Fear and despair distort his face as he realizes that he is trapped with no way out. The stunning blow seemed to have taken away all hope from Abel von Nibelung. But then a spark flashes in his eyes, and he lowers his hand to the source of the mysterious blue light. Memories of past battles, every blow struck and every drop of blood spilled, fuel his resolve. He steps out of the shadows, illuminated by a single spotlight, his posture screaming defiance, his fists clenched white. His opponents, previously confident of their victory, are frozen in bewilderment. And then, from under the hem of the frock coat, a blade appears, sparkling with an unearthly, cold light. Their faces distort with shock and the sudden realization of the true threat. With a flash of his blade, Abel reminds them of the invisible line they dared to cross. One of them, enraged to the limit, rushes into the attack, not wanting to accept defeat. A red aura envelops his figure, turning him into a flaming giant, seeking to crush Abel. But Abel, through pain and fatigue, only tightens his grip on the sword, calling on his mysterious power. The blade responds to his will, blazing even brighter, ready to cut through the darkness. A loud scream pierces the air as his opponent comes down on him with all his might. Abel takes the blow, his face contorted with effort, but his eyes burn with unwavering will. In the depths of his shining eyes, one can read an incomprehensible depth of determination, not subject to pain. The witnesses of the fight freeze, amazed by the unprecedented power emanating from Abel. Every nerve in the enemy is stretched to the limit as he feels the crushing response. A fist blazing with red flames rushes towards the target. But Abel does not flinch, meeting the onslaught with calm and calculation. And then, with one final decisive swing, he utters a single word that pierces the silence. Yes. But a single word from Abel falls upon the enemy, knocking him to the ground in the blink of an eye. A fierce power blazes in his eyes, silently proclaiming victory and complete superiority. A storm of destruction rages around Abel, and his fallen foe lies broken and powerless in the scarlet glow. Meanwhile, in another corner of the world, a certain master of his craft smiled, demonstrating perfect mastery of the instrument. But even in his confidence, it seemed like a crack was about to appear, foreshadowing something unexpected. A huge, focused silhouette, his hands cut with a familiar and powerful slash, creating a sense of unquestionable power. The flashing knife, like an extension of his will, was ready to completely subjugate the elements. However, suddenly anger appears on the master's face, his gaze narrows, directed at the invisible enemy. And so he himself rushes into battle, his blow crushing, leaving no doubt about his determination. And our opponent, as if under a giant press, puts forward his red, tortured hand, trying desperately to resist. His whole body shakes. He looks up, his eyes filled with unimaginable shock. Despair and pain distort his face. Beads of sweat run down his temples, marking the end of his resistance. Kling Siegfried von Nibelung watches the proceedings with a cold assessment, his penetrating gaze missing nothing. Kankama looks at this scene, her red eyes full of anxiety, sensing something inevitable. But Abel stands in the middle of the fiery funnel, unperturbed, his power knows no bounds. The enemy's last desperate gesture sees him try to close himself off, his distorted body struggling with an invisible force. But the destruction began with his arm, every tendon screaming in pain, heralding the inevitable end. Abel approaches, each step like a hammer, pushing his opponent back. He falls to the ground with a crash, his belt, once a symbol of power, now just a reminder of defeat. And while Abel calmly finishes what he started, a silent cry of agony escapes from the fallen body. The enemy's face twists into a grimace of horror as realization pierces his mind like an icy blade. A scream full of unbearable pain and despair escapes his lips, but is drowned out by the roar of his own doom. "I'm dying," he whispers, and life itself seems to flow out of him, leaving only an empty shell. But what is this? Red flashes flare in the air like a warning, heralding a new upheaval. Once again his eyes widen in shock as he feels something change inside him. Blood runs down his face, and his eyes reflect a primal fear of what is happening. From the depths of the soul a name bursts forth, a desperate, broken cry, calling out to someone who can no longer help. Abel, unwavering, stands over his fallen enemy, his blade emitting a cold glow, Kankama watching over him. The fallen man's gaze slides over the blade, and a dark thought flashes through his mind. With a knife like that, the young warrior silently prepares for the final blow, his figure silhouetted against the dark sky. But suddenly, something else appears on the enemy's face, ferocity, a desperate will to resist. His hand rises, shrouded in an unnatural glow, as if he were calling upon the last vestiges of his power. With a crunch and a crack, the flesh turns to metal, forming a powerful mechanism on his hand, burning with an ominous light. New scars cut across his skin, and a furious, maddened determination freezes on his face. Blue energy, cold and destructive, begins to burst from his metal grip, taking shape. A smirk twists his lips as his eyes glow with a demonic light in anticipation of the battle to come. Abel, oblivious to his enemy's theatrics, simply continues his countdown calmly, his gaze full of determination. A blue vortex of energy swirls around the enemy, ready to unleash its new, destructive power. But Abel doesn't give him a single chance to speak confidently, abruptly interrupting the flow of words. "You still have time to babble under your breath." Their gazes clash in a silent duel. Mad rage versus calm, deadly determination. 5 seconds until the decisive blow, until the last breath. Abel's blades pierce the air, and the body of Kling Siegfried von Nibelung takes the blow, tearing apart flesh and promises. His look of shock and rage slowly fades as the life drains out of him along with the blood. Every move Abel makes is a dance of retribution, accompanied by the countdown to the finale, the last, decisive moment when the line between light and darkness is erased. And now, after all the pain and fury, in his eyes there is only emptiness, slowly filling with nothingness. But then, deep in the pupil, a glimmer is born, weak but persistent. Abel comes to, realizing that the terrible nightmare has been replaced by the unusual silence of the hospital room. Every movement echoes with aching pain, reminding us of the cruelty of past moments. Meanwhile, a cautious glance from behind the door disturbs his fragile privacy. A stranger watches the awakening with shock, not daring to believe his eyes. Abel studies him silently, trying to piece together the fragments of memories of the past massacre. Soon, Kling Siegfried von Nibelung and Chloe the auditor enter the room, figures from the past, alive and well. Kling's gaze, usually so stern, was now filled with a kind of thoughtful sadness. Chloe, on the other hand, greets him with a disarming, almost childish smile. Abel looks at them, his mind refusing to accept what he sees. The world turns upside down. Is it possible that everything that happened was just part of a nightmare that couldn't take his life? Old Kling Siegfried von Nibelung watches closely, as if trying to read Abel's thoughts. The three remain in silence, each with their own secrets, lying on the border between reality and sleep. But a brief, brutal flash of consciousness brings Abel back to the terrible truth, the image of the last battle, imprinted in his memory. Abel dives deeper into the maelstrom of recent events, his gaze betraying his inner turmoil. Images of the final battle flash, with blinding clarity, piercing the consciousness like a discharge. In this whirlwind of memory, the majestic figure of Kling Siegfried von Nibelung appears again, illuminated by an unearthly light. However, the harsh grip of reality brings Abel back to the hospital room, where he sits trying to comprehend his current situation. The meeting of eyes. Kling's steely, wise gaze and Abel's direct, wary gaze hangs in the air, foreshadowing a fateful conversation. Suddenly, Chloe Auditor crosses the threshold, her usually carefree smile replaced by a note of confusion. Without wasting a second, she sits down on the edge of the bed, her touch as if intended to melt the ice that had gripped Abel. There is a mischievous twinkle in her eyes, and her smile promises much more than just friendly comfort. Chloe doesn't seem to be at all embarrassed by Kling's presence, and her flirtations with Abel become increasingly provocative. Abel is shocked by such audacity, his eyes widening in surprise and deep confusion. With a playful gesture, placing a finger to her lips, she casts a meaningful glance at Abel, hinting at the secret that must remain between them. Once again, as if in a flashback, Abel sees himself and Chloe in a whirlwind of past events, from secret meetings to moments of hopelessness. And then Chloe makes her triumphant gesture, full of jubilation and confidence, as if she had just won a decisive victory. She leans towards Abel again, her gaze full of teasing anticipation, as if reading his deepest thoughts. After that, she rises smoothly from the bed, maintaining this playful mystery until Abel takes his eyes off her. Her smile becomes even more seductive, and in the depths of her eyes there burns an undisguised and very personal intention. "So delicious," Chloe whispers, and her words sound less like a compliment and more like a daring challenge, an invitation to play a dangerous game. Abel returns the look, and something predatory flashes in his eyes too, skillfully hidden under a mask of indifference. But a moment later, his face again distorts with genuine surprise, as if he had just heard something incredible. Kaling and Chloe, standing in front of him, seemed to have just revealed some incredible, mind-boggling secret to him. Abel still doesn't fully comprehend the scale of what he's heard, his face frozen in bewilderment. Meanwhile, the majestic walls of the mansion guard this secret under the rays of the morning sun. Behind one of the panoramic windows, Chloe, as if awaiting the inevitable, watches the world with a slight sigh. Her calmness is just a mask that hides deep thoughts. But Abel, clenching his jaw, seems to be making some incredibly important decision for himself. Suddenly, a premonition of an approaching storm flashes across Chloe and Kling's faces, warning of danger. Chloe seemed to have finished her explanation, her gesture reflecting either relief or doom. They stand over him like messengers of fate, and Abel is in a vulnerable position. Abel's gaze becomes sharp, piercing, as if he saw something in his inner world. The tension between them grows. Awareness clashes with expectation. Ling, with all his wisdom, tries to convey to the young man that the stakes in this game are incredibly high. In his eyes is the weight of knowledge, the foresight of the battle that must be endured. A moment later, the two of them are sitting at the table, trying to find at least a drop of peace. Kling, taking a sip, looks up, and the unbending determination flares up in him again. And then everything around explodes into a red whirlwind. Abel bursts into battle, enveloped in the flames of his power. Each of his blows is a crushing wave of energy that tears apart space. Kaling, all beaming, enters the fray, his face contorted with furious concentration. He, like a true warrior, swings his sword amidst the fiery chaos, fighting for something greater. The flames of battle, despair, and an unbending will to win burn in his eyes. But even their combined strength may not be enough. A bell falls, and two bend over him, trying to save him. After the fall, when it seemed that all was lost, an unknown force awakens in Abel, enveloping his body in electrical discharges. Meanwhile, Kaling Siegfried von Nibelung sits thoughtfully, his gaze fixed somewhere into the distance, as if foreseeing future events. The soft clinking of a cup against a saucer echoes throughout the room, breaking the growing silence. Suddenly, a sharp glint flashes in his eyes, hinting at hidden thoughts and far-reaching plans. Next to him, her arms gracefully folded, sits Chloe Auditor, her calm expression a mask concealing a keen mind. Kaling addresses her, his voice measured but tinged with impatience or hidden reproach. Chloe responds with a playful smile, full of confidence, as if she had foreseen this conversation long before it began. Behind her glasses, her eyes sparkle with challenge. They reveal not just insight, but also outright cunning. The tension between them is growing. Every word is like a blow, and even Kaling cannot contain his irritation. Chloe, however, is enjoying the moment, her face distorted by an almost evil grin, revealing her true, calculating nature. Far from these intrigues, Abel von Nibelung stands on the landing, as if frozen in time, preparing for a new step. His gaze is tense and alert, every gesture revealing weariness, but also unwavering determination. Suddenly, Chloe loses her confidence, her face becomes covered in sweat, and genuine fear appears in her eyes. She looks down in embarrassment as Abel's gaze pierces her like lightning, making her feel trapped. Abel, however, ignoring the emotions of others, moves on, his hand reaching for the massive door leading into the unknown. As soon as he touches her, a bright beam of light bursts out, blinding him and causing him to flinch in surprise. A moment later, he stands in the middle of a huge hall, where dozens of eyes are fixed on him, and every whisper seems deafening. The students are chatting among themselves, their curious glances assessing the uninvited guest, and some are already ready to make caustic remarks. In this new, unexpected reality, symbols and signs like this badge speak of rules he has yet to understand. And so, the hall explodes with laughter, which for Abel sounds like the beginning of a new test, full of unpredictable turns. Abel walked down the rows, past the silhouettes of other students, and the hall buzzed with laughter, which only increased the anticipation of the unknown. He took his seat, leaning against the table as if preparing for the marathon that was about to begin. For a moment, a slight smile crossed his face, and in his thoughts, a note of carelessness was intended to drown out the surrounding noise. But his gaze quickly became serious, catching something that changed the rhythm of this morning. Kang Koama, with fiery red hair, approached his desk, her appearance unexpected and a little embarrassed. She stopped, the words stuck somewhere inside her, and Abel looked at her questioningly, not understanding the reason for her indecision. The girl lowered her eyes, her cheeks turning slightly pink, betraying the awkwardness of the situation. Abel caught her confusion, and his eyes showed slight surprise as he tried to decipher her silence. In response, he offered her a soft, reassuring smile, as if to say, "It's okay, talk." From above, the stage looked like a chessboard, where two pieces had just begun their movement. Abel continued to smile, waiting for Emma to break the silence between them. And she answered him with a smile, light but sincere, as if she found courage in his open expression. He sat back, pleased with himself, perhaps too hastily deciding that everything was settled. But then his gaze fell on something, and the smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of complete bewilderment. He gestured for her to sit down, trying to remain polite despite his sudden confusion. Kama, however, did not pay attention to his gesture. Her gaze was fixed on his desk. With slight irritation, she pointed to the object on the table that was apparently the reason for her arrival. She looked at him sternly, and Abel was still trying to figure out what exactly he had done wrong. There it was. On the table lay a book, clearly not what it should have been, and this was the cause of all the misunderstandings. And high above them all, Kling Siegfried von Nibelung watched, his sinister smile telling him that this was only the beginning of the game. A man steps into the foreground with a determined, almost furious expression on his face, his jaw clenched with tension. In the academic hall, Abe von Nibelung, seemingly oblivious to the mounting pressure, calmly raises his hand, attracting everyone's attention. The man speaking at the lectern looks around the audience with authority, his presence felt in every corner of the spacious hall. A low murmur runs through the rows as students, including Rachel Demore and Kang Koma, try to make sense of what's happening, their eyes full of questions. Is it him? Abel von Nibelung, with his head bowed, hides his thoughts. Only a slight movement of his eyebrows reveals his concentration. Unexpectedly, the paths of the man and Abel cross, their gazes meeting in a silent duel, foreshadowing a conflict. Abel von Nibelung responds with a slight, barely noticeable smile, in which one can read hidden knowledge and self-confidence. Comes from the man's mouth. his lips twisting as if he were considering his opponent's unexpected move. And then CHLOE. The auditor appears, her charming appearance and words, "It's a secret, boss," adding mystery to an already confusing game. Abel von Nibelung, surrounded by little secrets, merely confirms with a sly squint, "I keep everything a secret." Hee hee. With a wry smile, Abel von Nibelung concludes, "Your insight is impressive," as if teasing his opponent standing at the table. Somewhere off to the side, a short, mocking laugh is heard, as if some observer is enjoying the development of events. The scene changes abruptly. The sound of a foot hitting the ground announces the beginning of a completely new test, physical and intense. A furious race unfolds on the track, students rushing forward, their determination mixed with cries of "stop" and "forward." Among the crowd of runners, Abel von Nibelung stands out, his figure rushing towards the finish line, feeling the breath of his rivals behind him. Every muscle is strained. Abel von Nibelung already feels tired. His inner voice whispers, "I'm dying." Kankuma, running alongside him, gives him a look full of a mixture of surprise and support, but does not slow down. And yet Abel von Nibelung finds the strength to smile mischievously. Even at the end of his strength, he retains his inimitable charm. Step by step, Abel von Nibelung and Kama continue the race, each step an overcoming a struggle with themselves and with their rivals. Kama, her eyes are burning with determination. She is not just running, she is fighting. Her gaze is directed only forward, towards the goal. Abel von Nibelung, taken by surprise, only lets out a bewildered breath as he watches the incredible leap. Kama, as if charged with energy, celebrates her fleeting triumph, her smile shining with determination. He sees only her retreating back, and the realization that he is falling behind slowly settles in his mind. Every step is difficult for Abel. His lungs are burning, and his body is demanding a break, but he continues to run despite the fatigue that is suffocating him. The majestic walls of the academy rise under the crimson sky, silent witnesses to the daily trials. The empty room, littered with empty bottles, echoes with the grueling training, a silent testimony to the struggle. His hand suddenly grabs the last bottle, in every drop of which lies salvation from the burning thirst. Exhausted, Abel falls onto his bed, surrounded by the ghosts of the past day, where every muscle aches from overexertion. His eyes are closed, but sleep does not bring peace. Thoughts are spinning in his head, anticipating new challenges. The next morning, hundreds of students gather in the huge dining hall, but only a few know the true cost of food. A sudden shock makes Abel jump up, anger and bewilderment distorting his face. He turns around sharply, his gaze searching for answers, but finds only indifference and misunderstanding. There is a storm reflected in his eyes, a flash of rage mixed with despair in the face of injustice. In front of the food stamp box, Abel freezes, the scarlet stripes seeming to rip the hope from his hands. The bitter realization of reality hits him, mercilessly revealing the full severity of his situation. The menu, littered with astronomical prices, seems like a mockery of his empty wallet. 50,000 won for a pork belly? He looks up at the ceiling, trying to find a way out of the trap that poverty has driven him into. A single drop of water becomes the object of all-consuming desire, a symbol of his desperate struggle for survival. Suddenly, Abel jumps out of bed, his eyes wide and his body shaking with the realization of a new, terrifying truth. Memories of a carefree past, when money was no problem, now only intensify the bitterness and pain of the present moment. Abel suddenly leaps out of bed, his eyes wide, his body trembling with the realization of a new, terrifying truth. Memories of a carefree past, when money was no object, now only intensify the bitterness and pain of the present moment. His mind clings to the images, as if trying to push away something unbearable, but the piercing pain does not let go. Abel's head is throbbing. Each beat seems to echo in his soul, awakening hidden fears. He falls onto the bed, trying to find salvation in oblivion, but his consciousness refuses to calm down. But then, as if through a veil, an image from the past emerges. Abel is sleeping, serene and calm, not yet aware of the trials to come. And here he is, young and full of energy, smugly admiring his reflection in the mirror, confident in his irresistibility. But even then, in moments of self-admiration, Abel's gaze at his hands becomes thoughtful, as if anticipating that this power could be used differently. There are 2 knives lying on the kitchen table, gleaming sharply in the rays of the morning sun, and Abel looks at them with some inner doubt. Then his face lights up with a self-confident smirk, full of hidden arrogance, returning to the image of the Abel he once was. The next moment, his eyebrows draw together slightly, and he gestures to brush his hair from his forehead, a slight irritation or anticipation of something. A moment of silence is broken by a growing knock, each blow of which echoes with tension in the air. Abel opens the door decisively, his face serious, his gaze sharp, ready to face the unknown. Kama stands outside the door, all embarrassed and confused, hastily apologizing. Abel looks at her with a wide but somehow sly smile, as if assessing the situation. Kama blushes, her eyes wide with surprise and awkwardness. Behind the laughing Abel, his ominous pale shadow flickers, foreshadowing evil intentions. Kama lowers his gaze in embarrassment, trying to hide his confusion from his penetrating gaze. She looks up, her lips moving, ready to ask the question that seems stuck in her throat. Abel, now in sports clothes, smiles playfully, and Kama is surprised to hear his light, "What?" And so Abel, like a carefree boy, cheerfully runs off into the distance, leaving the puzzled Kama behind. Kama, returning, asks Abel in surprise, as if not believing his ears. Abel's eyes, deep and thoughtful, hold a secret hidden behind the ellipsis. Only echoes of a recent breakfast remained on the table, like evidence of a hectic morning. While Abel opens the refrigerator, Kama shares memories, mentioning life by the sea. Abel is deep in his work, looking concentrated, and Kama watches him, slightly puzzled. A slight smirk appears on Abel's face as a mysterious object flashes in his hands. In the spacious kitchen, surrounded by home comfort, they exchange glances. Suddenly, Abel feels a slight hesitation, his gaze becoming a little more intense. And then Kama, with a shining katana in his hands, appears before Abel, whose face reflects pure shock. Abel's thoughts revolve around this unexpected weapon, foreshadowing a new round of their unusual relationship. And so, as if accepting the challenge, Abel, his eyes shining with determination, masterfully cuts the fish, setting himself a seemingly impossible 30-second deadline. In this whirlwind of skill, Abel's eyes burn with the fire of concentration, and Kama freezes, amazed by his skill. When finished, Abel looks victorious, while Kama, amazed by the taste, whispers, "Delicious." A smug smile spreads across Abel's face, confirming his pride in the work he has done. An atmosphere of light fun reigns between them as they exchange happy smiles. Then Abel says something that remains off-screen as Kama continues his business. A soft smile illuminates his profile, heralding a new, relaxed turn of events. Abel bursts into laughter again, and Kama, taken by surprise, stands frozen in mute amazement. A wide, almost predatory smile blossoms on her face, reflecting a mischievous mood. And while Kama is busy with her affairs, Abel, full of confidence, watches her, anticipating future adventures. Abel turns away from the girl, casting a thoughtful glance at the shining moon. An unexpected rustle seemed to interrupt his solitary thoughts, causing slight surprise. He turns, a sly half-smile crossing his face as his gaze glides over Kama in the kitchen. But suddenly, his attention is drawn to something more intriguing, an old diary lying on the table. The rustle of pages as Abel carefully opens it breaks the silence, promising to reveal secrets. Every word on the yellowed sheets makes his eyes widen, anticipating other people's secrets. He reads about a recent exam, about a mysterious savior to whom Kama now feels indebted. Abel looks at Kama, who continues her work without suspecting, and a slight, barely noticeable smile plays on his lips. His fingers glide over the written lines, absorbing every detail of personal experiences. Another breath, another turn of the page, and his heartbeat quickens with anticipation. Then he discovers a name, Jama, and lines full of confusion describing her passionate feelings for her savior. "How sweet!" Abel whispers to himself, a spark of mischief gleaming in his eyes. The corners of his lips rise in anticipation of a new intrigue, almost predatory. But then, the next page, and his gaze falls upon endless confessions. "I love him." The whole world around Abel distorts as this obsessive phrase fills his mind, making his blood run cold. The innocent Kano, standing in the kitchen, seems like part of a surreal painting, broken by revelation. Abel looks at her, holding the diary, trying to understand how such a tender confession could create such an eerie feeling. However, this personal moment suddenly dissolves, giving way to ominous shadows and ancient secrets. Deep within this world lies the powerful Auditor de Sicilia clan, guardians of order who decide destinies in the shadows. For everyone born into their ranks is condemned to undergo harsh psychological training from childhood to become an instrument of their will. Only in this way could they break the will, eradicate feelings, and turn children into soulless performers. These bloody lessons of horror were forever imprinted in their frightened eyes. The merciless, Kling Siegfried von Nibelung watched the torment as the victim slowly faded away. Young Chloe, clutching her sword, was forced to stand by, feeling her world crumble. And now, the sword is stained with blood, and in her trembling hands there remains only emptiness and the horror of what she has done. Back to back, she and her mentor seemed to accept their roles in this dark drama. Chloe obeyed, her childish soul broken and her heart forever pierced with pain. A silent scream caught in my throat, every breath was a searing pain. The constant training and horrific trials warped her psyche, leaving a deep wound. Chloe's personality was erased, leaving only echoes of feelings when the time came to enter Joaquin Academy. In this majestic place, where class distribution depended on ability, every auditor, despite their draconic potential, had only one path. Due to ancient traditions and the agreement between the family and the academy, their true talent remained hidden. "Don't draw attention to yourself," Kling Siegfried von Nibelung's voice whispered again, forcing Chloe to remain in the shadows. The family continued to dictate her fate, taking away Chloe's teenage years and depriving her of any freedom even here. Fragile flower petals fell, reflecting her quiet despair, her unspoken longing. But suddenly, the silence was broken by an angry cry, and an unexpected defender came to Chloe's defense. It was Abel von Nibelung, whose rage was blazing in his eyes. "How dare you touch her?" Chloe is confused. Is there really anyone else willing to challenge their rules? However, one of the attackers merely smirked, threatening Abel with swift reprisals before returning to his victim. And so, in the midst of the bloody chaos, Chloe stands alone, her gaze determined, ready to accept her fate. Kankama appears on stage, her scarlet eyes glowing with determination and an ominous energy raging around her. Abel von Nibelung rushes forward, his movements sharp, piercing the crimson darkness with flashes of battle. While the fury of one enemy shakes the air, Kankama watches the proceedings, remaining an enigmatic figure. But suddenly, the chaos recedes, and we are transported into Kankama's tender memory of a fairy tale that warmed her heart as a child. A close-up of an old book, illustrations of bygone eras and heroes whose stories remain forever etched in her memory. Her gaze, usually direct and piercing, changes to an excited one, as if she is reliving the wonders of distant tales. She sees the image of a brave prince standing in the middle of a blazing battle, whose fate is not yet determined. And this vision merges with reality, where Abel, like that prince, holds a glowing blade in his hands, ready for battle. Her cheeks turn pink, and a previously unknown feeling begins to rise in her chest, awakening both confusion and delight in her. Kankama is once again alone in a dark void, surrounded only by echoes of her own thoughts and awakened feelings. "Love, damn," the words echo in her mind, like a struggle between light and darkness within her soul. At the same time, Abel seems to be trying to hide his awkwardness behind a nervous, forced smile. But Kankama is transformed, her red eyes glowing with renewed vigor, and an ominous aura grows around her. Abel once again hides his true emotions behind a carefree laugh, as if a mask conceals his inner experiences. The scene changes abruptly. We see Abel and Kankamu in a quiet room, an inexplicable tension hanging between them. Abel appears confused, his face expressing deep remorse, as if he had made an irreparable mistake. A heavy gulp betrays his inner turmoil, and unspoken words remain in the air. He addresses her by saying the name Chloe and points to the beautiful moon outside the window, as if trying to distract himself. Gratitude and slight embarrassment mix on his face as he admits his satisfaction. And, saying goodbye to her, he asks an alarming question that hangs in the air, like a harbinger of a new secret for everyone. Appearing unexpectedly, she takes Abel by surprise, and his surprised gaze searches for an answer to the sudden question. His gaze glides across the table where something important lies, causing a fleeting epiphany. Abel tries to smooth over the awkwardness with a joke about her diligence in her studies, but his interlocutor's abrupt statement that it is her diary only increases the tension. Abel's inner voice is indignant, struck by her insight and strange, inappropriate manner of speaking. A new disturbing thought pierces him as the reality of what is happening suddenly changes its outlines. Kankama appears before him in a completely new, menacing guise, holding a shimmering blade in his hands. Horror grips Abel. She's not just threatening, she's ready to act, and this realization causes panic. Seeking salvation, his gaze turns to the window, but he quickly dismisses the thought. Too high to risk, the building plunges 4 stories into the night sky, promising certain death if it falls. The only path to freedom lies locked behind a scarlet door, glowing with an ominous warning. The realization of the confined space strikes like lightning. He is trapped. There is no way out. His anxiety grows as he sees Kankama's blade crunch into the floor. Her figure, illuminated by the crimson light, radiates icy determination, and in her eyes one can read only emptiness. Abel's gaze fills with anxiety. He recognizes this state, which foretells trouble. Motionless, dull pupils and lifeless red eyes indicate a complete lack of emotion. He remembers her usual energy, realizing how fragile that mask can be. Waves of horror wash over him as he realizes the depth of her change. The thought that his own actions could have provoked this condition only increases the feeling of guilt and fear. Now he understands. This is not just a threat, but a deadly trap from which he must escape at any cost, because her thirst for blood exceeds everything he has seen before. Alone in a gloomy room, Abel searches for a way out of a hopeless situation, realizing that his life hangs by a thread. Abel desperately searches for any weapon. His gaze falls on a kitchen knife, the last hope in this trap. But Kankama is already here, her red eyes burning with determination, her sword foreshadowing imminent reprisal. Abel retreats in panic, realizing that there is almost no time and every moment brings him closer to the abyss. In a desperate attempt, he grabs the first thing that comes to hand, an ordinary stationary knife. The red glow of Kankama's sword pierces the air as she rushes forward, closing the distance. But Abel doesn't give up. His box cutter flashes blue as it meets the deadly blow. The fragile blade, charged with his will, becomes the only defense against the merciless blade. Abel's silhouette shimmers in the blue light, each block a struggle for survival, a dance on the edge. Suddenly, Abel's image is transformed. He stands in a strict suit, clutching a glowing blade that exudes incredible power. This sword is an extension of his will, a symbol of resistance in a space flooded with scarlet light. His gaze is piercing, and a mysterious voice sounds in his head, "Chloe, your hair is too long." But reality crumbles, giving way to a dream where Kankama sleeps peacefully, immersed in darkness. Kankama wakes up in confusion, looking around as if searching for something lost, something important. Her gaze is full of anxiety. She calls someone's name, but in response there is only oppressive silence. Fragments of the past come to mind, Abel looking thoughtfully out the window and her secret, tender gaze. Suddenly she jumps up, panic seizing her as she realizes her sword is missing. In a corner of the room, leaning against the table, her katana shines like a beacon in the darkness of her confusion. The blue glow of the sword seems to lift the weight from her soul, bringing a brief sense of relief. But the image of a room covered in blood and the stern face of Kling's Siegfried von Nibelung bring her back to the nightmarish reality. A weight falls on her shoulders again as she realizes that even after waking up, the nightmare doesn't end. Kankama, in bed, tormented by thoughts of the recent incident, cannot forgive Chloe for her recklessness. Her mind is haunted by recurring images and words that leave her unsettled. The anxiety is growing. Did she herself say something inappropriate at that moment that could have changed the course of events? Suddenly, her gaze falls on the floor, where there lies an object that does not belong in the bedroom. A box cutter. What is it doing here? Questions swirled in her head. And then she notices something strange about her appearance. Her hair seems to have become shorter. Could it be that she used this knife herself? An attempt at rationalization, like a defense mechanism, suggests that this is simply someone's inattention. But an inner voice, cynical and cold, demands that the strange event be recorded so as not to let it dissolve in consciousness. Her hand writes words in the diary, while an eerie smile plays on her face, as if she is anticipating something. Meanwhile, outside the walls, under the light of the full moon, another character suffers from a bout of nausea. Abel von Nibelung, as if under the influence of an unknown force, erupts from himself in rainbow streams, interrupted by desperate sounds. The blessing of painlessness has worn off, and every spasm pierces him with a sharp blade of pain. He pours out his insides again and again, cursing the invisible tormentor and the lost dinner. Exhausted, he leans back on the bench, barely breathing, his strength exhausted. The stomach is aching with hunger, but the body refuses to accept the food it just swallowed with such difficulty. Under the quiet gaze of the moon, his thoughts drift far away to recent events. Abel's memory flashes back to scenes of combat where the sword's purpose is either death or domination. But Chloe's katana. Her katana served a different purpose, leaving bloody marks on the enemy's body, but not taking life. He remembers the moment when, sensing mortal danger, he reacted instinctively. And, obeying the ancient instinct of self-preservation, his blow was aimed at the most vulnerable spot. It was only by a miracle that he was lucky that the blade that ended up in his hands was short, otherwise the consequences would have been different. He tried to convince himself that he could quickly clean up all the problems, but he knew that true stability and security are much more difficult to achieve. After all, when he first set out on this daring path, he was filled with far more grandiose ambitions than just survival. Ki, who had reached the heights of mastery with only a sashimi knife, now found himself in a world where old skills don't always save him. Sitting on the cold bench, he felt how an alien reality, like a bottomless abyss, was swallowing up his former dreams and aspirations. However, hope glimmered in the blessing of miracles, which granted unprecedented powers to those who were worthy of it. He knew for sure that there were only two legendary blessings in this game, and one of them was the blessing of valor. Deep beneath the surface of consciousness, in the mysterious depths of the game, lay answers and forgotten knowledge. The protagonist, chosen by the heavens, easily subdued even the demonic sword Balmung, who recognized his true power. And Abel von Nibelung himself, in this epic world, remained just a master of the sashimi knife, whose abilities seemed insignificant against the backdrop of great achievements. An internal scream echoed in his head. Get a grip, you need to focus on what's important. Only a week had passed since he entered the academy, and he only had a vague idea of the main characters and had no idea at all of the scale of the game world. The general plot was known, but the ending remained a mystery, and now he bitterly regretted that he had once abandoned the game at the most interesting point. He understood that it was necessary to strictly follow the official path, since any deviation could result in an unpredictable catastrophe. Meanwhile, the protagonist, full of determination, confidently walked through the majestic halls towards his predetermined destiny. The shadows of ancient evil loomed over him, symbols of a demonic threat ready to engulf the entire world in its abyss. The conflict between humans and demons intensified, and tension in the world grew with each new event. But what was this? The story was deviating from its usual plot, taking frightening, unfamiliar turns. How could these characters, to whom he had become so attached, simply die? The horror of potential loss had once driven him to quit the game, and now, in his mind, only one inevitable and terrible picture was clearly visible: war. Abel understands that there is no time to waste, there is very little time left until the fatal line, and it is time to act, casting aside illusions. He knows that in such games the hero usually wins, but Abel von Nibelung does not want to be a passive spectator. He needs his own strength so as not to live in constant fear. After all, this is no longer a game, but a reality, where every piece on the board has its own weight and can be lost. And then, as if in response to his thoughts, an inscription appears before him: Blessing of the Sword God. The system promises impressive combat enhancements, but also imposes restrictions on the use and enhancement of the sword. Abel feels that something is wrong here, some hidden detail is being overlooked. He intuitively clicks on one of the items, as if trying to unravel the hidden meaning of this blessing. The mysterious ability is supplemented, and Abel realizes that he needs not only a new sword, but also a completely new physical training. For one cannot rely forever on the temporary blessing of painlessness. He must master the weapon to be ready for anything. Time flies inexorably, and soon he will face not only battles, but also important trials in real life. A new sword, rank B, becomes his goal. With it, he will be able not only to defend himself, but also, perhaps, to pass all the certifications. Realizing that the path will be thorny, Abel von Nibelung gathers himself internally, preparing for the upcoming difficulties. His gaze rises, meeting something or someone in the night. Suddenly, the familiar silhouette lowers its head, expressing slight nervousness or embarrassment. This is Rachel Demura, and she seems to call this place her own. With the grace of a warrior, Rachel Demura draws her sword from its sheath, as if preparing for a duel. Abel von Nibelung looks at her in bewilderment, not understanding what is happening. Confusion can be seen in her aquamarine eyes. She clearly did not expect such a reaction or meeting. Abel, himself caught off guard, only opens his mouth in surprise, feeling the growing tension. And so they stand opposite each other under the cover of night, two completely different worlds colliding in silence. Rachel Demura breaks the silence with a phrase full of naked challenge, causing Abel to flinch. He, with his characteristic restraint, only frowned slightly, perplexed by such a straightforward address. Her words, like an echo in the night air, claim this place, although there is no apparent reason for it. Abel, turning slowly, cannot hide his genuine astonishment as he asks about such a strange claim to public space. Rachel just nervously adjusts her collar, clearly not intending to give in this unspoken battle of wills. A wave of annoyance rises in the depths of his mind, ready to burst out, but he restrains himself. Unexpectedly, she is already sitting next to me, explaining her choice of this spot, and immediately expressing wild admiration for the night sky. While she is engrossed in contemplation, Abel only silently watches her, trying to unravel this mysterious nature. His eyes reflect a mixture of discontent and some new, incomprehensible interest. Suddenly, Rachel changes the subject, asking about his weapon, and Abel, taken aback, confirms, wondering how she knows this. With a slight, almost sly smile, she reveals her source of information, none other than her grandfather, Kling Siegfried von Nibelung. She continues, discussing some special worldview that swordmasters have, as if testing his reaction. Abel just squints thoughtfully, trying to catch the hidden meaning in her words, or is simply embarrassed by her spontaneity. She then points to her own sword, displaying it with casual ease. And then, with a wide, disarming smile, he offers him to hold his weapon. Abel, puzzled but not without curiosity, looks at the sword, noting that it does not seem too heavy. His gaze slides to her, and he notices that Rachel seems to be pouting like a hurt little girl. "She's a bit strange," flashes through his thoughts. Is this really Rachel Demura? But Rachel only smiles slightly, her gaze full of a mysterious confidence that makes Abel feel caught. He tries to say something, but the words get stuck in his throat, leaving only a silent question hanging in the air between them. A mysterious half-smile touches her lips, and Abel catches himself thinking that Rachel is playing with him. His gaze is full of confusion, a mixture of surprise and some vague premonition. After a short silence, he finally forces out a hesitant more or less, as if trying to find support in his words. But Rachel only mockingly clarifies that she knows his name, while he doesn't know hers, asking a rhetorical question about his reaction. Her lips stretch into a thin smile as she notices how cliched his attempt to avoid getting to know her is. Abel, trying to defend himself, asks if he is obliged to reveal himself to the first person he meets, to which Rachel defiantly retorts, "Why not?" His suspicions grow stronger and he comes up with an unexpected theory, suggesting that she may be a spy for the Demon King. Rachel ignores his absurd assumptions, turning the conversation back to herself and asking why he is here alone so late at night. Abel was taken aback by her impudence, because she herself was sitting here at such a late hour, and a spark of annoyance flashed in his eyes. She easily replies that she went out to exercise, which, in her opinion, is obvious. He, in turn, declares that he, too, was doing exercises. She's curious about what exactly, and Abel deadpans that he was breathing, leaving Rachel completely baffled. Suddenly, Abel's gaze falls on her hand, and he notices with alarming attention the fresh wounds on it. Rachel jerks her hand away, her face contorting in surprise, and something like embarrassment flashes in her eyes for a moment. He watches her reaction silently, his gaze becoming even more focused and penetrating. "You work hard," Abel says, and Rachel nods, confirming that he does. She begins to talk about her striving for perfection, about how the slightest weakness can attract hungry dogs, recalling how she was displaced from first place in the entrance exam. The confession falls from her lips. This was the first time she had ever lost to anyone. A strange, almost manic smile appears on her face, foreshadowing something more than simple frustration. On the one hand, this defeat brought her relief, but on the other hand, it awakened a burning curiosity. Who was this person who managed to surpass her? Abel seemed to only now begin to understand Rachel's true motives when she added with a predatory grin that she was eager to know the name so she could smear it all over the wall, next time. Rachel, seething with indignation, pours out her pain and rage to Abel, telling him about the winner's unthinkable audacity and her own wounded pride. But then Rachel felt a wave of embarrassment at such sudden candor, and she wondered why she had trusted the stranger in the first place. She, with a slight grin, explained her choice by his apparent vulnerability, which, in her opinion, gave her the right to open up. True to her family's motto, Rachel admitted that she rarely finds true friends among her classmates, whom she considers boring and predictable. As the night drew to a close, Rachel stretched and announced her intention to go to bed, leaving Abel alone with his thoughts. Before she left, however, she turned around, and a shadow of unspoken expectation flitted across her face. Her straightforward question about Abel's name was met with an indifferent refusal, causing Rachel to instantly become indignant. The next morning greeted Abel with an empty auditorium, where each student occupied his strictly defined place, symbolizing the hierarchy of the academy. Abel von Nibelung, lost in his thoughts, sat at his desk, as if trying to find answers to the invisible questions hidden in the textbooks. While Chloe Auditor found it easy to get along with everyone, Abel deliberately avoided her, not wanting to draw unnecessary attention to himself. But when their paths did cross, Chloe's new acquaintances, including Con Kama, would cast cold, dismissive glances at Abel. However, Abel didn't care, because he was one of the few who had a special pass that gave him a unique status in this Tiger class. And perhaps it was this very sense of self-worth that made him distance himself from others, even if they were just as special. As he reflected, Abel even felt relieved that he did not belong to the upper class, which seemed to him to be nothing more than a gathering of arrogant clowns. The only thing that really worried him at that moment was the upcoming dinner and its modest but pleasant everyday joys. Sage Media Poison suddenly appeared, holding a black card in her hand, which, according to her, Abel should have been given much earlier as a top student. It was the faculty member card, a sign of unprecedented recognition for which Abel was ready to bow to the director 3 times, expressing his deepest gratitude. For Abel, this was more than just a pass. It was a sudden, stunning deification of his abilities and aspirations. With a slight smile, he accepted the card, realizing its true value and the potential it held. And in that barely noticeable grin, one could read the anticipation of new opportunities that were now opening up before him, changing the usual way of his life. On these lands, beneath a majestic sky, rises the Academy, a bastion of knowledge whose roots reach back to ancient times. 7 centuries ago, as the world reeled from the first war between humans and demons, the seer Joaquin Valor recognized the need for a new generation of protectors. He laid the foundation of the Academy, where the 7 sacred disciplines began to be taught, and his legacy is studied by every student to this day. Abel von Nibelung, lost in his thoughts, only nods distantly, because the basics of this story have long been known to him. Legend has it that Joaquin Valor was the one who rose up against the darkness. He fought the greatest evil ever seen by mortals. His opponent was Lycan, commander of the First Legion of Demons, the embodiment of destruction. The battle was brutal, a fight to the death where the fate of all existence was decided, and Valor emerged victorious. The energy of their collision tore apart the sky, leaving scars on reality itself. His light-filled blow pierced the darkness, sending the demon flying. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, each of whom had given his life for the future. The demons retreated, their legions disintegrating under the onslaught of the hero's fury. It was then, after the great victory, that the hero Joaquin laid the foundation stone of the Academy so that such a thing would never happen again. Thus, a non-aggression pact was concluded, ensuring a fragile peace between humans and demons for 700 long years. While most students are talking carefree about the secular future, not seeing the looming shadow, Abel von Nibelung, in contrast, feels that this long-awaited peace hangs by a thread and anticipates the inevitable schism. In this world full of disturbing signs, Chloe the Auditor seems to be looking for some kind of refuge, or perhaps a new companion. Abel von Nibelung's gaze is piercing. He senses a hidden intrigue hanging over him. By playfully suggesting that he run away somewhere far away, Chloe Auditor may be testing his reaction, or her words may have a deeper meaning. But behind that carefree smile lies something much more complex and disturbing, reflected in her suddenly blazing eyes. But the world they live in is much darker than it seems, filled with ominous omens and hidden threats. And sometimes, to see the truth, you need to look behind the veil of lies and be prepared for the fact that the view that opens up can be monstrous. Our protagonist, immersed in studying prophecies, stumbles upon an article that promises fatal twists of fate. One click, one word, and a sudden realization hits Abel von Nibelung. Having learned of his impending death, he is confronted with a shocking reality. A cold determination is reflected in his eyes, foreshadowing a struggle against predetermination, for no one wants such an outcome. For a moment, he imagines how things might have turned out if he had remained in ignorance, because knowledge is sometimes a heavy burden. The lesson is over, and the teacher's words about the exam coming in 2 weeks echo throughout the room, heralding a new round of testing. The atmosphere in the classroom instantly comes alive as students share their impressions, and one of them shouts in aberration at someone who enters. A friend, full of enthusiasm, approaches Abel, trying to pull him out of his reverie, but he seems to be in another world. And then Abel suddenly looks up, his eyes widening in recognition. He sees a man he didn't expect to meet here. In his hands is a phone, on the screen of which the image of Sage Media Poison, a character associated with his prophetic knowledge, is frozen. Whispers spread throughout the class as students wonder whether the newcomer will join their ranks or if he is destined for the star class. Abel listens intently, trying to remember the details, while Khan, and the other classmates eagerly await answers. Shock and slight anxiety are reflected on the faces of Abel and his comrades, foreshadowing new twists in the plot. A new student steps into the spotlight, his confident gait causing the crowd to part for him as if he were royalty. It is Leon van Reinhardt, his gaze full of arrogance and confidence, clearly indicating his special status. The next episode looms on the horizon, where Abel and Khan seem to be preparing for their next trials. And although his image seems painfully familiar, Leon van Reinhardt, surrounded by admiring glances, radiates a charisma capable of charming anyone. Amidst warnings about adult content, Abel smiles mysteriously, as if he is thinking about some cunning plan. In this world where destinies intertwine, Rachel Demora, Saki Rega, and Abel von Nibelung himself are each like an SSR card, possessing incredible power and potential. A group of students moves forward, following someone. Tension and quiet whispers hang in the air. The blond man, radiating confidence, turns to them with a soft smile. But for Abel von Nibelung, this is only a reminder of the past, which he vowed never to run away from again. He is lost in thoughts of the Demon King's colossal power, recalling how even great warriors could only defeat his subordinates. A horrific image of defeat flashes before his mind's eye, a bloody game-over screen that makes his blood run cold. Meanwhile, the blonde turns around again, his face lit up by a deceptively friendly smile. But the next moment, his gaze becomes more piercing, as if probing for something invisible. Abel and his companions, seized by a sudden premonition, stand frozen in mute surprise. The blonde, as if nothing had happened, continued to shine with his disarming smile. Abel, however, is not deceived. His gaze remains sharp and intense. He watches the group go up the stairs, and only one thought flashes through his head. The protagonist will certainly cope, but at what cost? Abel feels a twinge of regret, admitting that even he had fallen for the charm of someone who seemed the embodiment of trust. A sudden impulse pierces him, causing him to turn around sharply, as if sensing something important. The story, full of secrets and intrigues, is getting tighter and tighter. Night falls upon the training hall, enveloping its majestic walls with anticipation of future achievements. Inside, under the light of the lamps, one of the students is honing his skills, his movements precise and measured. He realizes an important truth. The magic of this world requires alignment, and without the right tool, true power will not awaken. Abel von Nibelung's gaze freezes, deep thoughtfulness visible in his eyes. Suddenly, Kama, full of anxiety, asks Abel if she made a mistake. Abel only smiles weakly in response, his smile betraying slight confusion or hidden anxiety. Abel hastened to reassure Kamu that everything was fine, although his smile still bore traces of slight confusion. The girl breathes a sigh of relief, but the question is still visible in her red eyes. Who is this mysterious stranger? In her hand, the sword shimmers as if alive, imbued with deep sadness, but at the same time exuding a deadly desire to kill. Abel, as if trying to distract himself from his oppressive thoughts, suddenly suggests that Kama invite her to dinner, causing her obvious confusion. Kama, blushing, tries to refuse, citing his modest culinary talents and looking for a way out of the awkward situation. At that moment, the image of sage media poison flashes through Abel von Nibelung's mind, causing him to freeze in deep thought. Kama looks at Abel with embarrassment, her gaze full of a silent request. Abel von Nibelung admits with a false laugh that he feels awkward refusing, but a dark premonition whispers to him about the potential danger of waking up in someone else's refrigerator. He, as if remembering something important, turns to the girl, now calling her Chloe Auditor, and suggests that instead of dinner, they discuss a favor. Chloe the Auditor, surprised by this change, asks again about the favor, while Abel von Nibelung declares that he can only rely on her. Chloe, blushing slightly, asks again, "What request are we talking about?" Abel von Nibelung, with a slight smile, voices his unusual request, to teach him fencing. And now, Abel von Nibelung is already training diligently with the staff, and a plan based on this good excuse is maturing in his head. At the same time, Abel studies Yandere survival guides, confident that he will be able to gather all the necessary information. At that moment, Chloe the Auditor appears, her aura glowing with anticipation, and she joyfully announces that she's been waiting for Abel von Nibelung for a long time. The girl enthusiastically declares that she also just arrived, specifying her time of arrival, 6:30. Abel von Nibelung asks again, puzzled, because he was sure that they had agreed on 8. A shadow of suspicion flickers in Abel von Nibelung's eyes. His gaze becomes sharp and penetrating. Chloe Auditor, catching his gaze, looks questioningly at Abel, but immediately tries to dispel his doubts. But Abel von Nibelung had already figured it out. Beneath her everyday clothes lay impressive musculature, explaining her incredible strength. Chloe, smiling, hands Abel a wooden sword, hinting at its special value. Kama, however, expected real steel blades, and her bewilderment was obvious. Chloe, without losing her calm, explains that this is just training and safety comes first. But Abel senses more than just concern in her words when Chloe giggles mysteriously. Kama grips the wooden handle thoughtfully, as if trying to decipher the weapon's true potential, and then she demonstrates it, one powerful swing, and the air around her is cut by an invisible force, shocking Abel. Abel stares at his wooden sword as a watermelon explodes spectacularly behind him, and the word blessing flashes through his mind. A system window pops up before Abel's eyes, blessing of the sword god, full of mysterious, currently locked stats. He reflects on the nature of this gift, which seems to defy the usual laws of craftsmanship. Abel wonders how to level up to uncover all the secrets, and suddenly notices Kama's worried gaze. She, worried by his silence, asks if everything is okay. Abel smiles sheepishly, realizing that these system windows are only accessible to him. Chloe, meanwhile, gently reminds him that this is only the first lesson, urging him to be gentle with her. The tension builds, and now a strong grip squeezes the wooden blade in anticipation. Abel, collected and determined, is ready to take on the challenge. A ringing silence reigns in the huge frozen hall. Abel and Kama stand opposite each other, as if before the decisive battle. His gaze is sharp and penetrating, analyzing every gesture of the enemy. Kama takes a fighting stance, and hidden energy begins to vibrate around her. Abel notices the uncertainty in her posture and the sheen of sweat on her palms, despite her outward display of strength. But he knows, true fencing is not only about power but also about precision and the ability to deliver precise blows. Kama challenges, her staff glowing red, each strike carrying a furious energy. Rachel Demura is shocked by this sudden onslaught, her heart pounding and her friend's stick feeling like a dangerous weapon. Kama's pressure intensifies. She unleashes a hail of blows on Rachel, and genuine terror can be seen in her opponent's eyes. Every collision is painful. Rachel struggles to contain the pressure, her face contorted with tension. Kama's grip is incredible, her hand merging with the weapon, her determination only growing with each passing moment. A whistle pierces the air, and another crushing blow falls on Rachel with merciless force. Rachel Demura desperately tries to block, but Kama's power seems limitless. She only retreats. The stick in her hands trembled as if it was about to fall apart, and each blow from Kama felt like an unbearable weight. Rachel's eyes are wide with pain and despair. She is almost at her limit. Her strength is running out. But Kama doesn't slow down. She rises into the air, preparing for another, even faster attack. Rachel Demura is horrified to find her opponent attacking at an unprecedented speed, leaving her no chance to catch her breath. Abel von Nibelung watches what is happening, and a barely noticeable but meaningful smile appears on his lips. The relentless dance of the sticks continues. Kama does not give a second to think, forcing Rachel only to defend herself. Kama's legs move with incredible grace. Her attacks never stop, and every movement is a promise of more pain. Rachel Demura seems cornered, barely able to block the shots, and every block comes at a tremendous cost. One more hit and I won't be able to take it, Rachel thinks desperately, feeling the strength leaving her body. And then, with a deafening crack, Rachel's stick splits in half, marking the end of her defense. Kama lowers her weapon, her voice filled with a hint of regret but also deep sincerity. She couldn't contain herself. Rachel Demura looks at her, stunned, a question in her eyes that she dares not say out loud. Her whole world seemed to turn upside down, and Rachel realized that she had just witnessed something much more than just a training fight. Abel von Nibelung, shrouded in the radiance of mystical energy, rushes forward, his movements full of unearthly strength. Kama, his eyes wide with shock and pain, steps back, barely holding back the scream that erupts from his chest. Through the swirling mists and sparks, Abel reappears, his gaze fixed on an invisible target, something sharp hidden in his hand. A chilling blue light flashes in the depths of his eyes, foreshadowing the imminent storm that is about to break. But suddenly, as if by a click, the world collapses, and Kama finds herself in the center of a lonely spotlight, frozen in a daze. We are transported into something like a memory or a dream, the kitchen, where Kama wonders if it was all just a vision or a ghost of the past. She must return to her work, to the preparation symbolized by the luminous fish, but an inner voice tells her something more. She wonders whether she should pick up the chef's old Chinese knife today, which has been gathering dust for a long time without being used. However, the system rejects her choice, and an ominous error message appears on the screen, preventing her from taking the much-desired blade. Even a sword like a katana seems out of her reach, as if some higher power is guiding her along its path. In the end, all she has left is a sashimi knife, and her inner voice insistently tells her to take that one. Kama feels excruciating pain just holding it, as if the blade is resisting her, or she herself is not ready for its true power. And suddenly, the pain disappears, replaced by a wave of inspiration as she lifts the knife over the glowing fish, ready for the transformation. But it is just a puppet, controlled by invisible strings, and Kankoma realizes that she is just a tool in someone's skillful hands. Meanwhile, in reality, Abel von Nibelung is no longer just a fighter. He is the embodiment of the elements. His aura takes on an ominous blue hue. Rachel Demura, seeing this, calls out to Kankama, her voice full of worry and the question, "Are you okay?" In response, there is only a vague silhouette of Kankama, surrounded by a flickering blue outline, and her silent question lost in the roar of battle. And again, a furious surge of energy, a blue whirlwind, a harbinger of a crushing blow, shakes the arena. This blow rushes forward, unstoppable, piercing space with a bright beam directed straight at the target. Abel lunges at Kankama, who barely holds the blow, her face contorted with tension and pain, while Rachel desperately cries out, "Wait!" The power that has awakened within Abel bursts forth, creating a whirlwind of destruction around him. Kankama flies back, barely managing to take the blow, and falls to the ground with a dull groan. But she doesn't give up, rising to her feet, the stick in her hand again, and a scream bursts from her chest. Horror distorts her face, blood freezes on her lips. This is not just a fight, this is a struggle for survival. There is confusion and pain in her eyes. It's as if he's been replaced. Abel, as if possessed, rushes into the attack again, his blows swift and merciless. Kankama barely manages to dodge, crouching, her staff barely able to cope with the force of the onslaught. Abel's eyes glow with an otherworldly blue light. There is no trace of his former self in them. Kankama is wounded but not broken, and all she can think about is, what's happening to him? We need to end this. She tries to reach him by calling him by name. "Jama, let's finish." But Abel doesn't hear. His gaze is wild. His hand reaches out as if trying to catch a phantom. The distance between them is shrinking, but the gap in their minds seems insurmountable. Through the pain, she calls out his name again and again, trying to pull him out of this madness. "Wake up, Jama." A blinding column of light, carrying destructive energy, erupts from his fist. But suddenly, reality distorts, plunging us into a pixelated world where a certain Kim watches what is happening in bewilderment. On screen, a fish dodges a knife, and Kim is amazed by its extraordinary agility. Why is it dodging? What the hell is going on? And then the fish starts talking, and Kim has a shocking question. What is it trying to say? Is it hallucinating? Kim is in shock, only one name popping up from his subconscious in his head, Joe, Jama. The image of Abel, surrounded by a blue glow, pierces the pixelated reality, and Kim remembers. In front of him is Kang Jama, and Abel, like a butcher, stands with a knife, and the red threads of fate wrap around him. Abel, trapped in this pixelated nightmare, feels someone else's despair calling his name. Somewhere from the depths of memory, a scream erupts, calling for Kankamu to wake up along with the name Chloe, like a warning. Abel's eyes flicker, reflecting someone else's agony as he relives forgotten events. Suddenly, the world explodes with the sound of a crushing blow, shaking the very fabric of memory. And here he is, young Abel, shielding Kankamu, taking upon himself the fury of an unknown blow. Tears stream down her face, mixing with dirt and blood, and her lips silently whisper words of despair. Her reddened eyes reflect deep pain, but also a spark of hope directed towards the Savior. Abel's smile, full of tenderness, calms Kankamu, offering an end to this nightmarish day. She, confused and shocked, cannot believe what is happening, while Abel carefully inquires about her condition. With a slight smile, Abel says goodbye, leaving Kankamu alone with her confusion. She watches him go, lost in her thoughts, unable to comprehend the true motives of his actions. From the outside, the majestic building rises under a cloudy sky, hiding secrets and power within its walls. Kankama walks slowly, her mind busy with thoughts of the inexplicable power that Abel hides. An image of Abel appears in her mind, and a strange premonition fills her as if something had changed within Kankama itself. Meanwhile, inside her, a whirlwind of red threads rages, weaving into an ominous, almost heart-shaped pattern. Despite everything, Kankama trains with a new, frightening determination, honing his moves. Her words sound like a recognition of Abel's strength, but a certain mysterious interlocutor senses something more in her, a hidden delight. Kankama's eyes flash red as she is faced with an unexpected revelation. A new figure, shrouded in mystery, emerges from the shadows. Nox's auditor, whose connection to the name Chloe will soon become apparent. Kankama, stunned, recognizes him as her brother, a realization that shakes her to the core. A masked Nox looks down on Kankama with disdain, accusing her of hanging out with scum after entering the academy. Konkama clenches her fists, resolutely interrupting his arrogant words, demanding that he stop insulting the person dear to her. Her brother, Nock's auditor, finally speaks the name Jama and coldly warns that the auditor family is prepared to get rid of anyone who stands in their way. Konkama freezes, her battered face reflecting pain and inner struggle, Nox's words echoing in her soul. Nox is surprised by her unwavering resilience when Konkama challenges him, claiming they can never defeat him. Nox slowly retreats, leaving Konkama alone with her thoughts, each step echoing heavily in the empty space. An anxious light flashes in his eyes as he repeats in his head the name that has become the center of this conflict, Jama. And then we see before us the image of a young man clutching a dagger in his hand, his gaze full of grim determination. In order to free himself from the sword god's blessing, he realizes that he must find a new, different weapon. The deadly blade glows with an ominous light as the young man embraces his new reality, surrounded by harbingers of impending darkness. But this power came at a price. An ancient curse took control of him, turning him into a puppet in the hands of an unknown puppeteer. Cut deeper, a sinister voice whispers, and despair appears on the face of the young man whose will has been enslaved. He gave up his body, allowing the threads of fate to weave around him, submitting to an invisible force that was shattering his world into pieces. Meanwhile, Konkama seems to sense this struggle from afar, her body shaking with invisible pain, as if reflecting the torment of others. Suddenly, a golden projectile pierces the sky, fired with incredible power, foreshadowing the coming collision. And then, out of nowhere, Konkama appears, but now her smile seems sinister and alien, and the name Chloe glows around her. But the old Konkama, with wide eyes, looks in bewilderment at the strange object hovering above her, trying to understand what is happening. At this moment, Nox, no longer wearing his mask, gently touches Konkama, trying to comfort her as she shakes with unbearable feelings, refusing to ignore what happened. His own sacrifice, his life, like a stranger thrown into the world, was now manifested in flames that consumed his power. With each new scar on his face, his eyes burned with determination. He just wanted to live, to escape the shadows of the past. And now, in a desperate struggle for a normal life, Abel once again feels the brunt of the elements. His path forward is a climb up dark steps, where every step is painful. His haggard, scarred face testifies to the unbearable suffering he endures alone. Something deep within him breaks, bursting forth, foreshadowing the inevitable. It's a curse, a terrible entity that constantly hangs over him, ready to swallow Abel at any moment, to turn him into nothing. But the world does not stand still, and while Abel struggles with his demons, a new clash, a fateful meeting, is brewing. In light-flooded classrooms, students gather once again to learn, unaware of the hidden battles. Among them, the bright and restless Konkama shares her impressions, trying to draw her friend into a whirlwind of adventures. However, her usual carefree demeanor is replaced by deep thoughtfulness, hiding something important. Her gaze wanders along the rows, looking for someone who is somehow absent from their usual place. Suddenly, the realization hits her. She doesn't even have his number to check if everything is okay. Why didn't she ask sooner? Anxiety gnaws at her, remembering the painful groans behind the dorm door and how hard it was to leaving him alone. She remembers how she loved to watch him rest his chin thoughtfully, lost in thought. How many times a day did her gaze involuntarily slide towards him, secretly noting every detail of his presence? But now he is gone, and even the noisy classroom seems empty without his invisible presence. A quiet but persistent whisper echoes in Konkama's heart, revealing the true depth of her feelings. I miss. The next day arrived, bringing with it new, gloomy weather and a feeling of inexplicable anxiety. Chaos reigned in the audience until the stern Kling sighed Efried von Nibelung restored order with his menacing voice. He announced that, due to weather conditions, training would be cancelled and replaced by independent training. But his thoughts were far from the curriculum. Abel von Nibelung was absent again, and the old teacher could only hope that all would be well with the boy. The students, although freed from the rigors of training, were reluctant to accept the idea of independent work. But suddenly, in the middle of the lecture, the sound of footsteps was heard, and the voice of Professor Kling Siegfried von Nibelung sounded with notes of discontent. His gaze, full of silent question, turned to the source of the unexpected intrusion. At the far end of the auditorium, on the steps leading to the exit, a dark figure appeared, attracting the attention of everyone present. Each step, firm and confident, echoed in the silence of the hall. It was Abel von Nibelung, returning from his mysterious disappearance, and his gaze was darker than usual. He walked down the steps like a ghost that had appeared out of nowhere, leaving behind a trail of omissions. Kankama couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise when she realized who was in front of her. Abel stopped in front of the stunned professor, apologizing for his tardiness with cold politeness. Kling Siegfried von Nibelung, although stern, could not hide his relief and confusion. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread among the students, discussing the changes in Abel's appearance, his peculiarity, his sudden transformation. Abel, however, ignored the gossip and headed to his place as if it were an ordinary day. He took his seat, maintaining a straight face as the lecture continued. As classes ended, students hurried out of the classroom, some eagerly anticipating food, others catching up on their plans. Chloe Auditor turned to Kankama, noticing her thoughtfulness and unusual silence. Kankama, trying to hide her excitement, assured her friend that everything was fine, but her gaze darted traitorously to Abel. She couldn't resist and walked up to him, her voice full of worry, remembering his absence and the training that had happened. Abel von Nibelung stood still for a moment, his face impassive and his thoughts unreadable. Then, turning to Kankama, he gave her a rare but genuine smile, expressing gratitude for her concern. Kankama was stunned. Abel's sincere reaction caught her off guard, causing her heart to beat faster. Kankama hesitantly agreed, but her doubtful gaze did not escape Abel's gaze. After all, her concern was justified. Abel had experienced unimaginable suffering, withdrawal symptoms that had driven him to complete exhaustion. It was a punishment that burned him from the inside. Every cell of his body screamed in pain. The pain was so all-encompassing that it eclipsed anything he had ever experienced before. He saw his reflection. His body remained the same, but his face was distorted, and strands of hair had turned gray from inhuman trials. It was his personal, inevitable punishment engraved on his soul. Thinking back to this, Abel realized that Kankama probably felt guilty for his condition, and this understanding made him think, this situation needs to be corrected urgently. Abel, noticing her confusion, suddenly offered her dinner, reminding her of her long-standing invitation. Her reaction was immediate. Beaming with happiness, she promised to prepare everything with special care, and Abel only smiled faintly. It didn't take much effort for him to notice the spark of hope that lit up her eyes again. Satisfied with the result, Abel allowed himself a relaxed, slightly enigmatic smile. But the moment of ease was interrupted. Kankama suddenly felt alarm when an ominous scarlet aura appeared around one of the plants. Abel's face instantly became serious, reflecting a premonition of an impending threat. They both peered into the distance, trying to figure out what exactly had disturbed the peace. Suddenly, a silhouette radiating hostility appeared from the darkness. His face was distorted with malice, his eyes glowed with an unnatural blue light, and a creepy, predatory grin was frozen on his lips. Kankama and Abel froze, amazed by the stranger's appearance. Abel, not hiding his surprise, asked Kankama a question that could change everything. But Kankama only looked away, her silence speaking louder than any words. Abel von Nibelung waited, his gaze full of questions and his mind swirling with thoughts, until Kankama said nothing. But instead of answering, Kankama decisively turned and walked away, leaving Abel alone with the oppressive silence. Suddenly, Abel von Nibelung felt someone approaching, and a masked figure appeared before him, emitting a strange, unsettling aura. Abel, unable to bear the tense silence, called on the stranger to speak frankly, reproaching him for his impoliteness. But instead of words, the mask only opened its eyes, and from under it ominous red lights flashed, piercing to the very soul. Kankama, noticing the stranger's strange look, desperately intervened, shouting Nox at him and begging her brother to leave. Abel realized that in front of him was Nox, Kankama's brother, whose appearance clearly caused the girl deep anxiety and a trembling in her voice. Nox, ignoring his sister's pleas, harshly condemned Abel, calling him too weak and unworthy of Kankama's friendship, while mentioning Chloe. Kankama, vehemently denying her connection with the auditors, declared that she was breaking with them, but Nox coldly reminded her of the blood connection that could not be escaped. Abel von Nibelung, observing them, noted that Kankama used modern slang, while her brother spoke in an archaic language, as if from the past. Nox continued to insist that Chloe the Auditor, as he called his sister, return to her family, but the girl, holding back tears, tried to object. Rage overwhelmed Kankama as she couldn't bear it any longer and screamed desperately, defending Kankama's name. She raged and thrashed, her anger tearing apart the space because they just wanted to have a peaceful lunch, and now everything turned into a disaster. The word auditor settled in Abel von Nibelung's mind, and gradually the fog began to clear, revealing long-forgotten memories. His mind was lost in memories of ancient scriptures that spoke of a clan that was skilled in concealment and murder, that they are inferior to other houses in open battles, but in ambush and stealth tactics they have no equal. The members of the Auditor de Sicilia family were said to possess incredible agility and intelligence, which compensated for their physical strength. Abel von Nibelung reflected on the comparison of the images of Knox and Kon-Kama, wondering about the normalization of deviation in their family. Knox's gaze left no doubt. He was ready to kill without thinking, and this thought pierced Abel von Nibelung with a chill. Abel understood that the auditors were eliminating their enemies from within to maintain order, and now he himself found himself in a position where killing might become necessary. Abel von Nibelung, as if frozen in time, watched Knox, trying to understand his true intentions. Knox, however, seemed to be on edge. Blood was seeping from his eyes, echoes of pain or determination emerging from the depths. Meanwhile, memories revealed Kon-Kama's tragedy. Her sword was a blessing, but freedom had been denied her since birth. Society, family, rules, all this made her a plaything of fate, merciless and pitiless. Abel smiled bitterly. "What am I doing? I can't save the whole world," he thought, realizing the limits of his abilities. And yet, he decided to approach, to build a bridge to this desperate man, to at least try to change the course of events. "Your name is Knox?" Abel asked, trying to reach the part of his soul that had not yet been consumed by darkness. Knox, hidden behind his mask, merely turned away, whispering, "No matter how hard I run from this force, I can't escape. There is no paradise in the place you're going to, and I agree with that." An invisible weight fell as something important was trampled, symbolizing the irrevocable loss of something valuable. Without missing a beat, Abel commanded, "Follow me. Don't fall behind," as if accepting the burden of leadership in this chaos. Meanwhile, a tense silence reigned in the teacher's room. Only the elderly teacher seemed frozen at his desk. Something changed in his face. It became empty, lifeless, as if all the emotions had been mercilessly sucked out of him. "Hey, senior," Chloe Auditor's clear voice rang out. "What's wrong? Even the hair on your head seems to be thinner than usual." But the teacher only cut her off sharply. "Don't mess with my hair?" His voice was full of hidden irritation. Chloe continued to tease him. "It's not the hair. You always walk around with that thing, even though it looks cute," hinting at some mechanical part. Suddenly, the phone rang, breaking the silence, and the teacher's face contorted in surprise. "What? Subspace now? Who requested it? And who is the enemy?" The answer stunned him even more. "Kon-Kama requested. And the enemy is Knox Auditor," came the voice on the other end of the line. And so, the scoreboard lit up with ominous numbers, announcing the upcoming duel in subspace, Knox versus Kon-Kama. Abel clenched his fists and peered at these names, thoughts flashing through his head about how quickly such an event could be organized. And then, out of nowhere, Sage Media Poison, with a sly smile, warned him, "If you're counting on this, be careful." Abel understands the rules. The battle will take place outside of reality, without physical harm, but with possible deep emotional wounds, and if he wins, it will all be over. The roar of the crowd, like a ghostly echo, penetrates even here, into the silence of the waiting room, and Abel cannot help but notice how violent the reaction to someone else's fight can be. Abel himself, tired and lost in thought, only sighs. He didn't want to attract unnecessary attention to himself, but it seems fate decided otherwise. At that moment, he notices Kon-Kamu, whose shoulders are shaking with silent sobs, and sympathy flashes in his eyes. Abel sees her tears and understands in his heart that Kon-Kama blames himself. But when he addresses her, he says the name Chloe, assuring her that what is happening is not her fault. He takes out a knife, showing that he borrowed her weapon, and confidently adds, "Everything will be fine," while Kon-Kama only sobs quietly. Abel stands up, leaving Kon-Kamu lost in thought, her silhouette looking even more fragile against the cold stone. She looks up at Abel, and her voice is barely audible, a whisper full of sincere admiration. "Brother is strong." Abel, looking at her, refutes this humility, saying mildly that she too possesses considerable strength. But Kon-Kama, full of ardor, begins a story about a certain genius who inherited the family power, who at the age of 14 was already called the Pinnacle of Night Technique. Abel just narrows his eyes. The title Pinnacle of Night Technique seems pretentious to him, and he wonders who comes up with such titles anyway. His gaze glides over the blade of the knife, and in his mind Abel admits that no matter how hard he tried to avoid such confrontations, he would still end up drawn into this. Suddenly, an announcement is made. The formation of the subspace has begun, and everyone is called to the arena, tearing them out of their thoughts. Abel gets up, promising Kon-Kama that he will return soon, and she only quietly agrees, watching him go. A slight anxiety, a premonition of something unknown, flashes in her eyes, but she remains silent. But Abel suddenly stops, saying the name Chloe again, and Kon-Kama responds in surprise, not understanding the reason. Abel approaches her, returning the knife, and with a piercing look says that the world is full of geniuses. Kankama's eyes widen in surprise, hanging on his every word. Abel turns around and, holding another blade in his hand, his own, he confidently walks away, towards the unknown. Abel's last look, through half-closed eyelids, radiates calm determination, a readiness to meet any fate. Abel stands in the center of the arena, the bottomless sky stretching above him, and around him the crowd is seething with anticipation, demanding a spectacle. The roar of the stands descends upon him, carrying with it hope and bloodlust, heating up the atmosphere to the limit. Abel chuckles, comparing the fight to ancient gladiatorial contests, not expecting it to be on such a grand scale. Abel's gaze glides over the crowded tiers as one of the spectators throws down a gauntlet in defiance. Recognition flashes in his eyes. Even members of the upper class did not miss the opportunity to witness this duel. Among them are Sage Media Poison, Khan Kama, and Chloe Auditor, whose faces express hidden interest and anticipation. Chloe Auditor, usually so lively, now watches intently, her gaze piercing the arena. Abel feels their gaze on him, feeling the additional burden of responsibility placed on his shoulders. Suddenly, his opponent's voice rings out, full of challenge, like a threat piercing through the mask. The enemy's red eyes glow with rage, and his figure is shrouded in an ominous shadow, foreshadowing a brutal blow. But Abel only grips his blades tighter, his face impassive, his gaze cold and determined. With a caustic grin, he accepts the challenge, inviting his opponent to prove his strength himself. Abel disdainfully remarks that a true pro never blames the instrument for his failures, which incurs the wrath of his opponent. The enemy takes a step back, a new, ominous light flashing in his eyes. He summons his sword, which glows with a mysterious scarlet light, enveloping his figure in a dark aura. Abel can't help but acknowledge his opponent's strength, noticing the unusual energy emanating from him. The enemy, now armed with 2 scarlet blades and clad in a legendary raven armor, radiates a formidable power. Abel senses it. The dark energy emanating from the enemy leaves no doubt about his serious intentions. For a moment, his gaze falls on his own blades, the Daiso sashimi knife and Chloe's rose dagger, realizing that they are of a far higher rank than he had assumed. So, the 2 warriors stand opposite each other, ready to begin their deadly dance under the arena sky. The concentration of energy reaches its limit, foreshadowing the inevitable. And so, the spatial gates swing open, inviting the chosen ones into the maelstrom of an unpredictable battle. A blue light flares, consuming the world around them and transporting them to a dimension where only strength and skill rule. The next moment, Abel von Nibelung and his opponent are face to face, their blades already prepared for the dance of death. Ancient blessings awaken, granting them immunity to pain and divine blade sharpness, a final gift before the mortal combat. The audience held their breath, not believing their eyes, their minds struggling to grasp the incredible speed with which the action unfolded. For most, what is happening is just a blur, a battle so lightning fast that it erases the lines between reality and the unimaginable. Abel lunges forward, his movements leaving trails of glowing energy behind him, creating a vortex that heralds a powerful attack. The opponent meets the challenge with composure, his eyes focused, and his body already prepared to respond to the blow with an equally deadly lunge. Even seasoned observers like Sage Media Poison and Chloe Auditor are amazed by the speed and skill, noting how quickly an ordinary fight turns into a spectacle for the elite. Rachel Demura, who had hitherto doubted Abel's abilities, watches his every move with shock, realizing the error of her previous judgments. The blades collide with a deafening ringing, each blow a wave of force that shakes the very space of the arena. Abel's opponent strikes with incredible precision, but Abel, like a shadow, eludes the deadly blade. And then, in response, there is a furious whistle of the blade, generating a purple wave of energy that rushes forward, cutting through the air. The enemy whirls in a whirlwind of his own power, his weapon leaving behind an ominous trail of dark energy, preparing a crushing blow. His gaze, full of fierce determination, throws a silent challenge to Abel. Will he be able to resist this pure, furious power? The purple aura around the enemy thickens, turning into a concentrated storm of destruction. In an instant, Abel finds himself at the center of this whirlwind, his face distorted with surprise and the inevitability of the approaching blow. A powerful burst of energy crashes down on him, enveloping him in darkness and threatening to engulf every particle of his body. But even in this chaos, Abel's blue energy flares, forming a barrier that holds back the onslaught, foreshadowing that this fight is far from over. The opponent, amazed by his agility, cannot believe his eyes as Abel dodges the blow again. Abel, although he looks exhausted, remains unperturbed, his gaze sharp and focused. There are comments from the outside that underestimate his defense, but some are already starting to sense the freshman's hidden strength. However, Chloe the auditor, watching the fight closely, realizes that Abel is not just dodging, he is skillfully parrying, not wanting to enter into an open confrontation. The enemy finally realizes that he is not just facing a fugitive, but a master of defense, whose tactics allow him to emerge unscathed from the most dangerous situations. Realizing Abel's exceptional speed, the enemy decides to change tactics, preparing for a devastating blow with a wide radius of destruction. Looking at his weapon only increases the rage boiling within his opponent, fueling his determination to crush Abel. A sudden, piercing sound distracts attention, and for a moment something unexpected flashes in the air. The enemy's face contorts with shock. Abel does something completely unexpected, causing him to flinch. A graceful yet deadly blade appears in Abel's hand, adorned with delicate flowers, which is completely out of place in the battlefield. A shadow falls across Abel's face as he shifts his stance abruptly, swinging his blade as if preparing for the final blow. He rushes forward with lightning speed, leaving a whirlwind of dust behind him, and the air fills with questioning tension. His eyes shine with determination, an indomitable fire burning in them, foreshadowing a change in the tide of the battle. Rage takes hold of the enemy, his gaze filling with scarlet light as he shouts a deadly threat. In response to Abel's insolence, the enemy draws his weapon, glowing with an ominous red light. The scarlet glow intensifies, enveloping the blade in a dark aura that foreshadows destructive power. An ominous energy envelops his figure, transforming him into a menacing silhouette that promises to end the fight with one crushing blow. His face is distorted with determination, his red eyes are burning with malice, and words of absolute confidence and victory are frozen on his lips. He declares that no one can stand before his scarlet wheel, but the ground beneath Abel is already beginning to crack from the hidden power. The last syllable escapes his lips as Abel prepares to respond to this threat. A sudden, blinding pulse pierces the air, heralding inhuman speed. And now Abel is swinging his blade, which is burning with cold blue energy. His opponent, who so confidently threatened the Scarlet Wheel, is thrown back by a force invisible to the eye. Horror distorts his face. He could not even see the beginning of the attack, only felt its crushing force. The world around Abel blurs in a rapid dance, vortices of power rising from the ground. He moves like a ghostly blade, his figure shrouded in a blue glow, and in his hands is the very will to win. The audience froze, their faces reflecting pure shock and awe at the unfolding spectacle. Two titans, two shadows, clashing in an epic battle, their silhouettes carved against the backdrop of the grandiose struggle. Abel's eyes burn with an icy flame. They contain boundless determination and a steely will. The enemy is defeated. His weapon lies in a pool of blood, and Abel stands over him, unwavering and menacing. The blade's swift, merciless strikes cut through space like lightning, leaving no chance for defense. The red eyes in the masked face glow with pain and rage, but Abel's strength is undeniable. Every blow is a new rupture, a new scar, leaving behind a bloody trail. But the enemy also responds. A monstrous explosion of dark energy spreads across the arena, shaking the very earth. The crowd screams in panic, trying to comprehend the scale of destruction caused by this unbridled force. Tormented and broken, the enemy falls to his knees, his strength exhausted and his hopes dashed. Abel stands in the center of the devastation, his blade still glowing like a beacon in the raging chaos. His grip on the hilt is sure and firm, energy pulsing through the blade, ready for new achievements. Rachel Demura and the other girl look at him, their faces expressing a mixture of horror and admiration. And so Abel turns, leaving the battlefield, leaving behind only the echo of the battle that shook everyone. Abel seems to be already fed up with this circus. His gaze is tired and empty. A strange realization flashes through his thoughts. This fish knife, an instrument of peaceful life. It proved to be a formidable weapon in combat, and Abel admits that piercing living flesh with it is quite unpleasant. The winner, despite the triumph, feels a certain emptiness. Turning around, he glances at the loser, remembering Chloe's words. The opponent was not so simple. He had a huge amount of combat experience. But what good is such power if it only pushes people away? This was a battle of individuals, where only true strength mattered. It was this power that allowed Abel to emerge victorious as the arena, like a mirage, dissolved into reality. And then the winner's name flashes on the giant scoreboard, Khan Kama. A wave of surprise and disbelief sweeps through the stadium. Khan Kama, he beat a second-year student, the spectators whisper, looking at Abel, and Abel himself only smiles condescendingly, What's done is done. The past can't be changed. He leaves the arena, leaving behind surprised looks and whispers. The next day, talk about yesterday's match continues even in the corridors of the academy. Each student discusses what happened, enthusiastically sharing impressions and rumors. And even in the classrooms, amidst the noise and din, the echo of the name Kan Kama continues to sound. Among all these voices, Chloe the auditor says thoughtfully, "So his name is Kan Kama." Wherever she goes, there is only this conversation, although, admittedly, there really is something to discuss. After all, yesterday's fight was a real revelation, where Abel's small silhouette confronted a huge shadow. Chloe, remembering the moment of triumph, involuntarily shudders, seeing before her eyes the bloody mark on the leg of the defeated enemy. Her gaze, full of horror and some strange admiration, again freezes in a silent question. And, for a moment, the image of Abel himself appears before her, imprinted in her memory as something broken, but incredibly powerful. His weapons were just two ordinary kitchen knives. That's what shocked her to the core. Rachel Demura, proud of her swordsman lineage and deep knowledge of weapons, suddenly realized that she had been wrong all this time. Is it really possible to achieve such monstrous, unimaginable power even with such simple tools? A sharp, pulsating alarm sounded in her mind, an echo of events long past. She remembered how she had once looked at Abel, throwing condescending words at him, probably because you look weak. Then, full of arrogant confidence, she was burning with the desire to know the name of the one who dared to surpass her, so that next time she could smear him across the wall. Now, with each passing second, her eyes grew wider as the truth crashed down on her mercilessly. So it's him, Abel. All this time he, the one she underestimated so much. Anger and the realization of her own mistake overwhelmed Rachel, causing her to clench her fists until her knuckles turned white. Con Kama, what the hell were you thinking when you looked at me? What? Rachel's inner scream threatened to burst out. The sudden crash as Rachel slammed the table made the air in the classroom shake. Kankama raised her eyebrows in surprise and asked in bewilderment what had happened. Rachel, trying to hide her storm of emotions, quickly apologized, claiming that nothing special had happened. But Kankama's sly gaze pierced her through, and she smiled and doubted her friend's sincerity, luring her out of the truth. Rachel stuttered as she tried to come up with a lame excuse, like she hadn't trained in a while, and then her emotions burst out. "What are you talking about? Your face says something completely different," Kankama retorted, teasing her friend and demanding that she tell everything as it is. Then, moving on to the guessing game, she started with a simple, "Are you hungry?" Rachel immediately snapped, "No." "Did you forget your weapon at home?" Kankama persisted, meeting an equally categorical number. "PP?" she continued sarcastically, causing Rachel to finally explode. "I'm telling you, no!" And at that moment, with a devilish grin, Kankama delivered the decisive blow. "Ah, you have a boyfriend." Rachel Demura flushed, her aquamarine hair sparkling with confusion and rage, and her yellow eyes flashed with denial as she answered Kankama's tricky question. While Rachel was trying to gather the last of her dignity, Sage Media Poison narrowed her eyes with a sly grin and said ironically, "Oh, my God, so who is this handsome guy?" An image of the mysterious Leon flashed before Rachel's eyes, and Sage, thoughtfully putting a finger to her lips, added, "Well, he's cute." "Oh!" Rachel cried out desperately, her voice piercing the air like lightning, trying to stop any further speculation. Sage just smiled slyly, her gaze growing even sharper. "So it wasn't Leon, then." A shadow shrouded in darkness appeared in her imagination, the stern silhouette of Abel von Nibelung, whose face was full of cold determination. Sage pointed a finger at Rachel, her pink grin widening. "The dark one, huh?" Rachel recoiled, her heart skipping a beat and her eyes widening in shock and panic as she realized Sage had guessed correctly. A devilish grin spread across Sage's face, her pink heart-shaped eyes shining with anticipation. Interesting. Before Rachel could process anything, Sage grabbed her arm, her grip unexpectedly strong. "Huh, what?" she blurted out, stunned. Rachel, taken by surprise, tried in vain to resist, but Sage, laughing, was already dragging her along, not giving her time to come to her senses. "Where are we going?" Rachel screamed in fear, feeling the world around her spinning in a whirlwind of madness driven by her friend. Sage turned around, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Where to?" "To Tiger's class." It sounded like a death sentence. Before they could react, Sage threw the doors open, bursting into the office with a loud greeting, dragging a completely confused Rachel along with her. The students in the class froze in surprise, dropping their drinks, their faces expressing a mixture of shock and pure amazement. Ignoring their shock, Sage strode proudly through the classroom, leading a reluctant Rachel who only whispered, "Oh, Rachel, let's go." Sage's gaze swept around the room, and, as if she had discovered a treasure, she exclaimed, "Oh, this place will do." Without hesitation, Sage gracefully leaped onto the nearest desk, her sneakers hitting the surface with a distinctive crunch. She stood up to her full height, towering over the frozen class, her silhouette filled with dominating confidence, preparing to perform. Finally, Sage looked Rachel straight in the eye, her toothy grin widening, the hearts in her eyes glowing ominously, foreshadowing a public execution. Rachel timidly pointed out that standing with your feet on someone else's table was not the most polite thing to do, but Sage, smiling sweetly and winking, easily retorted, "I'm a beauty, so forgive me this once," and Rachel, blushing, could only squeeze out an awkward agreement. Rachel felt an unbearable shame, covering her face with her hand, while two classmates behind her looked at each other in surprise. Suddenly, Sage's expression distorted, her eyes turned into pink hearts, and a creepy grin froze on her lips. Found it. Kankama, sitting nearby, giggled playfully as she watched Abel sleep, and the question flashed through Sage's mind whether this was his girlfriend. But her eyes were already glowing with an ominous purple fire. "I don't care. This is even better." Like a predator confident of her inevitable attack, Sage elegantly adjusted her tie, preparing for the next step. Her steps up the stairs were light and confident, every rustle foreshadowing the inevitable. Kankama, who had been smiling cheerfully until then, suddenly froze, her face distorted with sudden horror and a premonition of disaster. Sage leaned silently over the peacefully sleeping Abel, her breath barely touching his hair. She moved close to his face, hovering over him in frightening proximity, while his classmates watched the scene in stupefaction. Chloe and Kankama were literally drained of blood, their faces contorted in a grimace of shock and absolute horror. With a dull thud, Sage sat down right on the edge of the desk, her appearance as deafening as her confidence. Abel von Nibelung, awakening from sleep, raised his head, his gaze clouded and silent questions hovered around him. Sage looked down at him with a mischievous, almost devilish grin, and a huge, oppressive uncertainty hung in the air. Leaning playfully, Sage addressed him, casually mentioning that she had seen him at the fight yesterday. Her finger pointed at Abel, who involuntarily flinched at this unexpected attention, and the words, "especially," hung in the air. Suddenly, Kankama, full of rage, grabbed Sage's arm, her eyes flashing red, demanding, "Who are you?" The atmosphere in the classroom became electric with their confrontation as Kankama repeated her angry question again. Kankama's eyes glowed red, and her jaw was clenched as she glared at her opponent, preparing for any battle. Sage Media Poison only smiled mysteriously in response, her eyes twinkling with ominous pink hearts as if she was anticipating the spectacle. Abel von Nibelung, in confusion as he pronounced Chloe's name, was shocked to realize that all this rage was coming from here. Kankama's transformation was complete, her eyes glowing with a maddened red light as she menacingly drew her box cutter. Abel von Nibelung felt cold sweat on his forehead, his gaze was full of horror and disbelief at what was happening. At this point, Chloe Auditor, indignant, reprimanded Rachel Demora for her outburst, who was already dragging Sage Media Poison away, while she only nonchalantly claimed that they had only come to say hello. Sage Media Poison, ignoring Rachel's attempts, only smiled mysteriously, her eyes shining with ominous hearts again. Sage Media Poison patted Kankama's head contemptuously, which only caused him to flare up even more furiously. Kankama's red eyes blazed with hatred in response, and she gripped the handle of the stationary knife tighter, ready to act. "Well then, let's get back to our," Sage Media Poison sang, but her words were cut off by a sharp swing of the blade that flashed in Kankama's hand. Kankama's blade flashed through the air, leaving a trail of blood behind it, and her gaze was full of determination. Abel von Nibelung and Rachel Demura stood frozen, shocked by the suddenness and brutality of the attack. However, Sage Media Poison didn't seem to even flinch, only an ominous red glow reflected in her heart-shaped eyes. In this tense moment, attention was momentarily distracted by another student who exclaimed in despair that his juice had leaked out, and a sad truth about the way to attract attention flashed through his thoughts. His companion, tired of the drama, only muttered irritably, "Yes, yes, shut up already." But back to the main drama, Sage Media Poison deftly intercepted Kankama's arm, stopping her attack at the very last moment. Sage Media Poison's grip was absolute, and Kankama let out a strangled breath, trying to break free. A desperate cry of, "Rachel, stop!" pierced the air, calling her to her senses. Sage Media Poison finally frowned slightly, her pink heart-shaped eyes showing mild irritation. Suddenly, Kankama was sent flying backwards, her body spinning helplessly in the air before she collapsed. And Sage Media Poison just smiled triumphantly, moving her hand away, showing who was the reason for such a spectacular flight. Konkama's eyes widened in pure horror, a second before the world around her lost all meaning. And she wasn't the only one. The entire squad under her command was thrown back by a powerful wave, their silhouettes scattering in a purple whirlwind. But Konkama wasn't one to give up easily. She landed instantly, ready for the next step, despite her shock. The spectators, including Abel, watched in shock, unable to believe their eyes. At that moment, Rachel Demura, heir to the Force Prevalence clan, whose name alone is a promise of unbridled power, appeared. With a teasing smile and a sparkle in her eyes, she turned to Abel and asked a very personal question. Abel, without taking his eyes off the arena, answered briefly and firmly in the negative. His thoughts, however, were occupied by Khan Kama, whose aura shone with fury. "You can't look," flashed through his head. Rachel seemed to accept his answer, letting out a thoughtful, "Friend." Chloe Auditor soon joined them, descending the steps as if emerging from the shadows. Abel, absorbed in his thoughts, didn't even immediately notice her presence, which clearly upset Chloe. Without wasting a second, Abel finally turned to them, asking them directly about the purpose of their visit. Rachel, with a sly smile, explained that Abel had piqued her interest and they had come to see each other. Chloe, however, jumped in surprise, her face turning red as Rachel brought up the sensitive subject. Chloe exclaimed indignantly that Rachel had forced her to come here, but Rachel only innocently replied that Chloe seemed to want it herself. Chloe, unable to hide her indignation, could only squeeze out a curt "this," trying to find the words. The students around began to whisper, wondering what was going on. Was another skirmish brewing? Chloe tried to explain, saying that there had been a misunderstanding and that she had not intended to come at all. A tired Abel just waved his hand irritably, suggesting that they leave if there was nothing urgent. His words, full of cold detachment, left both girls taken aback by their suddenness and such directness. Sage, seemingly oblivious to his coldness, playfully called him funny, declaring that she liked guys like that, while Abel just mentally sighed, glad that he wasn't one of them. Without retreating, she leaned closer, offering to meet after class to watch a movie at her place. But then Konkama, as if awakened from a deep sleep, exploded with rage, her eyes blazing with a crimson light. A powerful surge of energy caused her to rush forward, driven by pure, burning anger. Sage, who had been self-assured until then, suddenly recoiled, perplexed by such a sudden turn of events. In a panic, she clung to Abel, muttering about wanting to go back to her mother, her voice shaking with fear. Suddenly, Chloe Auditor appeared, enveloped in a mystical, turquoise glow, and involuntarily exhaled, "Ouch." Sage, quickly coming to her senses, smiled slyly, saying goodbye to Abel and turning ironically to Kankama, to which Abel only sullenly told her not to return. Sage and Chloe walked away, waving cheerfully goodbye, while Kankama glared at them and Abel only irritatedly wished for them to disappear from sight. The retreating figures of Sage and Chloe left Kankama confused and Abel lost in dreams of peace. Kankama, still puzzled, kept her eyes on Chloe as she turned around, glancing at Abel. Chloe's gaze, usually so open, now seemed thoughtful and deep. She froze for a moment, and around her, like an echo, a ghostly reflection of her own figure appeared. Her golden eyes stared into the distance, as if trying to solve an invisible riddle. Her turquoise locks swayed slightly, emphasizing the gravity of the moment and the hidden strength that lurked within her. And while Abel remained immersed in his apathy and Kankama in confusion, Chloe slowly walked away, casting one last piercing glance. Sage, as if observing something that was unknown to others, stood at the window, her gaze riveted to the outside world. Then both of them, Sage and Chloe, moved forward confidently, their steps sounding measured and determined. One could understand his composure and detachment because he had been through too much. But deep within his dark, impenetrable eyes lurked something far more sinister and disturbing. At the same time, Sage Media Poison seemed to be enjoying every bit of tension that hung over Abel, mentally noting how close she had come to her goal. Her thoughts wandered far away, recalling the history of her clan, which for decades had married only outstanding warriors. A sinister grin stretched across her lips as she thought about Khan Kama's role in this complex game. Next to her, Chloe Auditor felt the pressure building, her expression becoming serious and thoughtful. Chloe tried to apologize to Abel, but Sage just brushed her words aside like an annoying fly. Chloe seemed to understand the real reason for her apology, but Sage interrupted, insisting that wasn't the point. Chloe's face showed confusion. What was Sage really getting at? Sage stood there, full of self-satisfaction, enjoying her role in this intricate intrigue. And then the terrible truth dawned on Chloe. her eyes widening in shock as she finally understood Sage's intentions. Meanwhile, far from these intrigues, the sharp, insistent sound of wheels could be heard through the hospital corridors. From the depths of his consciousness, words burst forth, full of rage and determination. "I will kill! I will kill!" A member of the Auditor clan, his face contorted with pain and anger, rushed out of the room, dragging an IV behind him. He moved forward, consumed by the single burning thought of revenge, and every step he took echoed in the silence. Was such a body, the body of the great Auditor clan, supposed to never know defeat? He couldn't accept it. His gaze, burning with mad determination, looked into the night, where the full moon was rising, as if calling for retribution. Against the backdrop of Abel's imperturbability, his anger seemed all the more vivid and reckless, foreshadowing a storm. Anyone who stood in his way in the narrow corridor was thrown back with unheard-of cruelty. He was ready to gather his entire clan to take revenge and crush the one he considered an arrogant brat. Unbridled, he rushed through the corridors of the hospital, driven only by an all-consuming thirst for blood. Meanwhile, Kankama, full of determination, realized that her rival was as strong and dangerous as she was, if not more. She rushed forward, the determination in her red eyes stronger than any shackles, and a mysterious object glimmered in her hand. Every cell of her being screamed about the righteousness of the path, not allowing any doubts in her own strength. And somewhere far away, on the edge of consciousness, something ancient and evil was awakening, gritting its teeth in impotent rage. Abel von Nibelung, as if feeling an invisible pressure, thoughtfully bit into a ripe apple. Their gazes met in the dim light of the hospital room, where the air was charged with unspoken questions and old grievances. But then the scene changed, transporting us to the past, where Kankama, sitting at her desk, was filled with a different but equally tense anticipation. Abel seemed irritated as he recalled recent events and the danger that this seemingly ordinary girl posed. Her anger grew, and thoughts raced through her head, foreshadowing cruel retribution for those who dared to stand in her way. Suddenly, Kankama's furious gaze filled with amazement at the mention of Chloe's name, foreshadowing something grand. Then, as if by magic, the anger disappeared and Kankama turned to Abel with an innocent smile, causing him to worry about her true nature. Abel awkwardly adjusted his collar, clearly considering how to answer her question about the condition of their mutual friend, Knox. Her gaze was full of expectation, demanding an honest and direct answer on which much depended. Abel just looked back in bewilderment, not fully understanding the reason for her deep concern. After all, in the subspace where they fought, physical wounds should not have led to hospitalization. Kankama admitted that she had not seen Knox in person, but rumors about his stay in the hospital haunted her. However, her voice sounded confident, assuring him that everything would be fine with Knox and there was nothing to worry about. But Abel couldn't shake the feeling that his attack had affected Knox much more than he had expected, leaving deep psychological scars. To ease the tension, Abel lightly stroked Kankama's head, causing her to instantly look surprised. But suddenly, as if by a click, we were thrown back into the chaos of the hospital, where Kankama, full of rage, recognized her old adversary. Abel, with a barely noticeable smile, calmly examined her, holding that same red apple in his hand, as if he possessed all the secrets. Kankama, who was hooked to an IV drip, could no longer contain her irritation, mentally urging on her opponent. Abel, oblivious to her anger, continued to enjoy his apple while Kankama made a caustic remark about the luxury of the room. Shock and bewilderment were evident in her eyes. How could this man, her sworn enemy, be here, next to her? Abel just smirked, his gaze cold and penetrating, as if he was reading her thoughts and enjoying every moment of her confusion. Suddenly, Abel extended his hand, and a slight glint of light slid across the sharp blade lying on the table. The next moment, a blade flashed in his hand, ominously reflecting the light, which made Kankama's heart clench. But instead of attacking, he simply began to slowly peel the apple, his movements precise and measured, teasing her nerves. Indeed, the peel peeled off in a single, perfectly even spiral, causing Kankama to experience mixed feelings of anger and involuntary admiration. When he finished, he carefully placed the peeled apple on the plate, and then a distinct crunch was heard, like the sound of provocation itself. Kankama didn't take her eyes off him, her anger growing with each passing second as Abel stared indifferently out the window. Rage filled her, and she gripped the kitchen knife she had brought with her tightly, ready to strike him at any second. But Abel took a step, his boots making no sound on the floor as he approached the exit. Kankama tried to stop him, but the words stuck in her throat as he walked calmly towards the door. He stopped, turned around, and uttered a phrase that made the blood run cold: "Your entire family." These words struck Kankama like lightning, her eyes filled with horror and disbelief. Before she could come to her senses, a piercing ache was heard, as if an invisible force had fallen upon an object nearby. And then the peeled apple on the plate flashed red, as if an ominous energy had awakened within it. The next moment it shattered into hundreds of pieces, and Kankama collapsed to the floor in horror, her world destroyed. Abel, without even looking at her, merely casually crushed the fragments with his foot, leaving behind only emptiness. He stood as if he were the master of the night, his figure silhouetted against the mysterious, starry sky shrouded in darkness. Sedge Media Poison, enjoying his victory, realizes that the threat had an effect on Abel, as he was morally broken. A rage grew deep within his mind, a sinister whisper promising destruction to those who dared to break his spirit. But even in this chaos, his mind retained a cold calculation, and he rejected the most radical paths, looking for another way out. The full moon looked down from the sky at his lonely figure, giving no answers, only deepening the silence of his thoughts. Abel walked slowly away, his silhouette dissolving into the night, leaving behind only the echo of unspoken thoughts. Rachel Demura, watching the scene with fear, felt the growing threat of a hidden force preparing to attack. Abel, as if anticipating the impending events, greeted them with an arrogant, almost defiant look. It seems that one problem has been solved, but a new one looms ahead, its shadow already hanging over the hero. And that problem was undoubtedly Sage Media Poison, whose mischievous eyes radiated an evil light. Abel understood her manipulative nature and sought to avoid any contact, knowing her tendency to cling as described in the game. But now there were more pressing matters on the agenda that required his full attention, the approaching midterm exams. For them, he needed not just a weapon, but Murasame, a blade capable of withstanding the onslaught of enemies for more than 30 seconds. The calendar on my phone was a relentless reminder of the upcoming test, leaving little time to prepare. These exams are more than just a test of knowledge. They are a simulated battle where 5 people must fight using magic. But for him, this was only the beginning, as most of his opponents in the exams were too weak to pose a real challenge. Among them were those like these vicious, fish-like monsters, whose fangs promised a quick and brutal fight. But even more dangerous were the mysterious rank monsters, like this twisted, almost demonic mermaid. Faced with something like this, Abel knew with cold confidence that ordinary opponents of his class wouldn't be strong enough to even make him strain himself. After all, the mermaids were not just monsters, but belonged to the dangerous category of demons. However, he was relieved to realize that in the exam he would only encounter ordinary monsters, which, for him, compared to demons, were just a warm-up. Abel von Nibelung, who had spent a month within the walls of the academy, enjoyed the deceptive peace of the night. The peace he prized so much was a thin veil over the disturbing reality. 7 centuries have passed since the fragile truce between the worlds, but this world has always been permeated with echoes of ancient strife. After all, deep in the memory of humanity, and in its own, lie the images of those who knew no mercy. The ominous border he had vowed to reclaim always reminded him of a distant and terrible past. Shadows of the past, awakened demons. This is the true enemy that his ancestors had to face. This battle, this cry, this despair are echoes of the great war that will forever remain in the history of his family. A cry of despair, the name Zeke, tearing through the air when hope seemed lost. And then, like a ray of light in the darkness, a warrior appeared whose determination could change the course of the battle. But even heroes were not immortal, and the shadow of death loomed over everyone who stood in the path of evil. The horror reflected in the eyes of the survivors became a silent testimony to the monstrous massacre. The people celebrated the victory, not knowing that this was only the commander of the 6th Legion, only a small part of the demonic power. And now, through the centuries, he himself lived in relative peace, although he understood its fragility perfectly well. His thoughts returned to the past, to the mystery. How had Valor Joaquin managed to defeat Raycon alone? Was he really more than just a man? He scrolled through the years on his phone, knowing the future held inevitable disaster. Plans to prevent disaster seemed futile now. Better to focus on the pressing matter, the upcoming exams. Irritated by the need to seek allies, Abel suddenly wondered, hadn't he been living too inconspicuously until now? But then it dawned on him that his recent fame at the academy could be a trump card that would allow him to assemble a strong team. Excellent. 3 years of relative peace is enough time to harness your power and pass the exam successfully. After a short time, Abel von Nibelung was ready to face the challenges of the academy and his destiny. Despite his internal preparation, the world around him remained a battlefield where every day could become a test. His reputation, cemented after the first year, became a shield that repelled potential allies. But deep inside, a smoldering ember of determination did not allow him to give up in the face of any obstacles. He was not alone in his alienation. Kama apparently also felt the echoes of recent events. When Abel approached Kama, it turned out that she, despite her former popularity, was also left without a team. Her assurances that everything was fine sounded strange, especially after the hint of affection she had given him when he was around. Without wasting any time, Abel suggests joining forces and finding 3 more to form a full-fledged team. Kama's eyes lit up with excitement, anticipating the upcoming adventures with his unexpected ally. But her joy was suddenly interrupted by someone's impudent and loud intrusion. Showing up uninvited, Sage Media Poison announced with a sly grin that she wanted to have some fun. Abel, already anticipating new problems, only sighed deeply, not wanting to get drawn into her games. But Sage wasn't going to back down so easily, provoking him with her unceremonious questions. Kama, overcome with rage, barely restrained herself from attacking the impudent girl, waving her hand like a dagger. Abel dismissed Sage decisively, declaring that he had no time, while she, in response to his refusal, mockingly called Kamu Bunny. Kama's attempts to stop the bullying were futile. Sage pointedly ignored her words. Eventually, Abel had to physically intervene to stop the daycare and put an end to the altercation. However, even while lying on the floor, Sage continued to ask Kamu about the team for the exam, as if nothing had happened. Abel was wary when Kama admitted that her team wasn't yet assembled, and Sage immediately seized her chance. With a devilish glint in her eyes, Sage immediately invited her to join her team, leaving Kamu confused. And while Kama's fate hangs in the air, the next chapter promises Abel another unexpected encounter, face-to-face with a new challenge. Abel, whose expression did not bode well, gloomily acknowledged the obvious. But Sage's predatory smile only intensified, foreshadowing a new round of intrigue. She leaned towards him, playfully provocatively touching his chin as if testing his strength. Abel, outraged by such impudence, was perplexed as to why he had become the object of her attention when a whole line of people had lined up behind Sage. "They're boring," Sage sang, "but you'll be so much more fun." Abel shivered at her words. He tried to fight back, citing the fact that he was already on Chloe's team, but Sage only smirked. "Great, we have exactly 2 seats available," Sage announced triumphantly, holding up 2 fingers. Abel sighed heavily, realizing that without her help, their team risked losing the award and even damaging their average score. He glanced quickly at Kamu, seeking her approval or at least support. Kama, as if understanding him without words, nodded slightly, giving silent consent. Sage, noticing their unspoken decision, promised with a sly smile, "Okay, but no nonsense." However, Abel was still on guard, asking the main question, who is the true leader in this strange team? Sage just smiled mysteriously, looking at her phone, and replied, "Oh, it's very popular." At that moment, as if by fate, the door swung open and someone new appeared on the threshold, designated only by the number 2. Seeing him, Abel turned pale like a ghost, and a sharp pain pierced his body. He sank heavily into a chair, trying to comprehend what was happening, shaking with shock. Memories of his past life, of 30 years spent slicing fish, of such a distant and calm reality, flashed through Abel's mind. Looming above him were the figures of Sage and Rachel Demora, their shadows foreshadowing the upheavals to come. After all, standing before him was none other than Leon Van Rijkaard, the main character of this game, whose appearance changed absolutely everything. Abel realized that his choice had irreversible consequences, and now he would have to bear full responsibility for them, not knowing how the system itself would react to this. It all begins with a terrible realization. Sage Media Poison, with her devilish grin, has already added Abel to the team, depriving him of any hope of retreat. Abel's inner world was torn apart by anger and despair, because for the first time in his life he so strongly wanted to escape from the girl, as if from an imminent catastrophe. Before he could recover from the shock, Kama appeared behind him, her red eyes glowing with an unkind fire, and Abel froze, unable to utter a word. "Ever since that blonde came up to you," Khan said with a fake smile, hiding her jealousy under a mask of innocent curiosity. Abel, trying not to reveal the true reasons for his concerns, cited discomfort from being on the same team with the guys from the star class. Kama, beaming with delight, hastened to assure him of her superiority. Her words sounded like sincere praise, but Abel only thanked her dryly. Abel's gaze slid over Khan, noting that even in this new group, not everyone was of a high level, which added to his inner turmoil. Changing the subject, Abel turned to Chloe, wanting to clarify the details of the upcoming meeting with the team in order to distract himself from his oppressive thoughts. At 6 o'clock in the cafe, Khan responded, repeating the words of the blonde, as they had now agreed to call Rachel Demora. Finally, a shadow of a smile flickered across their faces, heralding at least some semblance of a normal day, despite all the recent events. The sun's rays illuminated the facade of the SS Tarbox Cafe, where the rest of the team members were already waiting for them, unaware of the drama unfolding behind the scenes. With a resounding "so," a glass filled with a mysterious green drink landed on the table, heralding new culinary delights. Kankama sipped her avocado smoothie with delight, while Abel drank his bitter espresso with barely concealed disgust. 50,001 for this green nectar. Abel mentally calculated the insane prices, feeling his pocket getting thinner with each passing second. Suddenly, Abel shuddered. A grimace of disgust froze on his face, and his lips were stained with something red, to which Khan raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Really?" Khan asked carelessly, not noticing the horror in Abel's eyes as he tried to hide his disgust behind a forced smile. His gaze fell on the espresso, the only thing affordable, but its bitterness was unbearable, and without a student discount, this place was an unaffordable luxury. Suddenly the phone rang, and a message from Rachel appeared on the screen. The time was already past 6 in the evening. Abel quickly grabbed the phone. Rachel was already waiting for them in the cafe, worried about Khan's delay, but quickly calmed down when she saw that they were approaching. And there they were. Sage Media Poison, with her ever-present sly smile, and behind her, Leon Van Rijkaard, whose serious expression hid a deep secret. And then their steps resounded, filling the space with the tension of anticipation, foreshadowing a new meeting. Sage Media Poison and Leon Van Rijkaard took their seats, and the air around the table seemed to thicken, as if preparing for the storm that was about to break. Leon cast a direct, piercing gaze at Abel von Nibelung, who responded with an equally intense, searching look, full of hidden questions. But Abel's attention was immediately drawn to another new face, hidden behind Leon's back, whose appearance was quite unusual. Who is this stranger with a daring hairstyle and a mocking squint, as if challenging everything around him? A strange thought flashed through Abel's mind. Was this guy, who was sitting so casually at their table, one of the bandits? Leon, as if noticing Abel's confusion, extended his hand, offering not just an introduction, but something much deeper. Abel shook the outstretched hand firmly, and his voice clearly pronounced only the name, Khan Kama. Leon did not hide his admiration for Abel's talent, admitting that he had impressed him in a recent battle and expressing his joy at seeing him on his team. Then 2 cups of drinks landed on the table, and next to them was a small note, as if a sign of the upcoming game. Sage Media Poison, like the conductor of this strange orchestra, suggested starting with formalities, and everyone agreed that it was time to introduce themselves to each other. Leon Van Rijkaard, the team captain, introduced himself confidently, expressing hope for productive cooperation during the upcoming exams. Abel watched the beaming Leon closely, whose image seemed flawless, as if carved from marble. Sage Media Poison, with her usual self-assurance, waved off the introduction, and the impatient red-haired stranger urged the others on. Then the red-haired guy spoke up. "My name is Speedwarp, and for your information, I like heroes." Abel noted with bewilderment the sparing nature of his words, sensing a certain naivety behind this bravado, which immediately destroyed his first impression. Suddenly, Kama, who had been silent until then, looked up sharply, her scarlet pupils dilated with shock or indignation. An echo of "my Kama, my, I," echoed through her thoughts, betraying a deep affection or even obsession. Sage Media Poison watched her with a sly grin, enjoying the stormy emotions of Khan, whose eyes blazed with a furious, undisguised fire. Taking a deep breath, Khan finally said, more calmly, that they had decided to join the team together, expressing hope for a fruitful collaboration. While Kama expressed hope for cooperation, Sage Media Poison and the rest of the new team members viewed her words with cool restraint. Abel von Nibelung listened intently, absorbing the information about Kama, the girl who introduced herself as Chloe's classmate. The entire team, now consisting of 5 people, sat around one table, and the general tension hung in the air, making Abel feel increasingly uneasy. One of them, a fair-haired young man, decided to take the initiative into his own hands, quickly pressing a key to call for the start. And then, in the center of the table, a holographic map began to glow, its sudden appearance causing Kankamu to cry out in surprise. It was Scopuli Island, the site of their upcoming exam, a map of which the professor had provided them only a few hours ago. The fair-haired youth himself seemed familiar with the material, a confident, almost smug smile played on his face. The hologram then changed, revealing the ghostly silhouettes of the students against the backdrop of a mystical forest where mysterious portals pulsed. He leaned impatiently over the keyboard again, suggesting that they delve into more detail to understand the full complexity of the upcoming test. The map came to life, flashing ominous warnings over several structures, hinting at new, hidden threats that had not yet been revealed. Sage Media Poison, with a sly grin, and her red-haired companion studied the screen carefully, their gazes full of hidden intentions. Abel and Konkama also watched intently, trying to predict which of them would break ahead and end up among the leaders. After finishing the demonstration, Abel looked around coldly at everyone, his question, "Any questions?" sounding like a challenge. The red-haired young man, without hesitation, asked a provocative question about mermaids and other dangers that could await them on the island. The blond man calmly replied that the teachers had taken care of safety by adapting the island for the exam, to which Abel only nodded briefly. Suddenly, the same fair-haired young man who had given the presentation asked an important question. Will they have to fight other teams right on their own turf? Abel, without looking away, confirmed that the exam was aimed at fighting monsters, but that clashes between teams were also quite possible, and asked if the answer was exhaustive. Konkama looked curiously at Abel, who seemed to be deep in thought about the possible consequences, her thoughts on the other teams. The blond-haired young man concluded the meeting by announcing that he would prepare on his own and meet again tomorrow, while in the background, Rachel Demura, in her usual style, dragged Chloe Auditor to lunch. Suddenly, Abel found himself alone at the table with his fair-haired comrade who, feeling increasingly awkward, hurried away. Abel was left alone with the oppressive silence and inner tension that was reflected in his gaze. His usually stoic face twisted into a grimace of deep concentration or barely suppressed irritation. The fair-haired Leon, having waited for this moment, looked questioningly at Abel as if preparing for something important. At that moment, Abel shuddered internally when he heard the name Kama spoken by Leon, as if testing his reaction. Abel turned, his gaze sharp and penetrating, ready for the inevitable confrontation. And so, in a piercingly quiet voice, Leon asked a question that echoed throughout the empty hall. "Where are you from?" Abel fixed his gaze on Leon, knowing deep down that this question was not so simple. Leon, arms crossed, calmly endured this gaze, his blue eyes shining with mysterious knowledge. Abel suddenly realized that he had heard this question before, but now it felt completely different, full of hidden meanings. "Where am I from?" The thought swirled around in his head, revealing to him not just his birthplace, but something much more fundamental. In Leon's eyes, Abel saw a reflection of his own secret, something that connected them. He discarded simple explanations. Leon wasn't asking about geography, that was too obvious. No, Leon deliberately waited until everyone had left to ask this question in private, away from prying ears. A heavy silence hung in the air, and Abel felt the threads of intrigue weaving around him. And then Leon, breaking the silence, challenged, "You and I are alike, Kama." The name Kama spoken to Abel made his eyes widen in shock and disbelief. Despite his national identity, he was suddenly confronted with a claim to similarity that hinted at something beyond the ordinary. Leon, noticing Abel's reaction, tried to ease the tension by suggesting, "Let's pretend this conversation never happened." He stood up, saying with a slight smile, "See you later," as if wanting to end this strange conversation. But Abel didn't let him leave, stopping Leon abruptly and asking with the same piercing force, "And where are you from?" Abel grabbed Leon by the shoulder and waited for an answer, but he only turned away, maintaining an imperturbable expression. There was more to their gaze than just a casual acquaintance. Leon smiled mysteriously, and Abel asked silently. Without saying a word, Leon simply left, his figure disappearing behind the glass door, leaving Abel alone with his thoughts. "What's wrong with him?" flashed through Abel's mind, his face expressing deep confusion and anxiety. In his excitement, Abel didn't even notice how his hand slipped and the spoon fell onto the table with a quiet clink. His eyes reflected a storm of emotions, a premonition of something important, a barely perceptible shadow of memories. It seemed to him that Leon, like himself, had arrived here from another world, a thought that haunted him. It was impossible to be sure that he was the only one who was drawn into this game, because Leon is the main character, and this is his advantage. In a state of blessing, all of Abel's senses were heightened, allowing him to detect even the most subtle anomalies. His gaze piercingly studied the world around him. Every detail took on new meaning, and it seemed as if space itself was trembling with tension. But then a stunning realization occurred to him. What if Leon, despite everything, belongs to this world? It was like he had once, in a past life, encountered similar paradoxes while trying to decipher the code of reality. Abel grabbed his head. As soon as he thought about it and tried to get to the bottom of the truth, his head began to split, and even the blessing of painlessness didn't help. He remembered Leon as he had been in the game, the embodiment of the hero that Abel himself had once controlled. If Leon were an ordinary character, he would act differently and would not have such strength and mystery. But it was that phrase of Leon's, full of hidden meaning, that made Abel doubt everything. He decided to check by diving into the internet, but there was no information about Leon van Reinhardt in this world. Abel leaned back in his chair, deciding that he would hardly ever see him again after the exam, but he would still prepare himself if he had to work with him again. Suddenly, Chloe the auditor appeared with a playful smile and an offer that could change his entire course of thought. Abel looked at her, his eyes filled with something between surprise and a new, unclear determination. Abel turned inward again, reminding himself of the need to maintain a clear mind despite the emotions swirling within and the chaos around him. The secret scrolls of his fate unfurled before him once again, revealing the blessing of the Sword God, a gift that whispered of great power and equally great responsibility. He was aware of how his body, like a blacksmith's blade, was tempered by endless training, surpassing the limits of spirit and strength that seemed immutable. But in the depths of consciousness, the thought of the upcoming battle loomed like a shadow, of those who were once family now becoming only shadows on the battlefield. A feeling of confusion washed over him again. Too many questions, too few answers, and no one to point him in the right direction. His gaze flashed, piercing the unknown like the blade of a sword, ready to cut through the veil of mystery. Suddenly, the world shrank to 40 seconds, a fleeting moment that would decide everything, causing both shock and a keen sense of urgency. Remembering past trials, he allowed himself to smile. Every fall, every pain, every victory, all of this was a step towards today, and it was worth it. With a new, almost childish enthusiasm, he raised his blade, feeling a surge of energy and confidence, anticipating what was to come. The days merged into a continuous series of grueling training sessions, every movement, every blow honing his body to perfection. Even in the rare moments of respite, among friends, the air was electric with anticipation, and the playful banter of Sage Media Poison only heightened the sense of impending storm. Abel continued on his way. Next to him, Kama, whose energy and support became an unshakable stronghold in this marathon into the unknown. The last few days had been filled with tension. Every look, every word carried echoes of the coming trial, and Sage's sly squint and Khan's seriousness only confirmed this. Here it is, the final push. Just one day, one breath before the world changes forever, and Abel throws all his strength into this decisive moment. His blade shot into the air, blazing as it pierced through space, reflecting a determination forged in the crucible of intense training. Every muscle, every cell of his body was the embodiment of strength and determination, ready to meet any threat. A light, almost predatory smile was frozen on his face, promising his opponents only cold steel and unwavering will. Before him opened the gate to subspace, not just an arena, but a completely different world, full of dangers and hidden possibilities. With a sharp movement, with one word, with one glance, he called on his allies to follow him into this abyss. And they, his faithful companions, Sage Media Poison, Kama, and others, stood shoulder to shoulder, ready to step into the unknown, where a new destiny awaited them. Sage Media Poison, with her signature sly smile, subtly hints at someone's unpunctuality, heralding a new dynamic within the team. Leader Leon, with a slight half-smile, calls for concentration with one glance, preparing to give the command. And the defender, with his hair scorched by fire, only clenches his jaw, ready for any obstacles. Meanwhile, the cheerful Chloe auditor, full of energy, loudly greets Camus, lighting up the space with her presence. Kama, although slightly embarrassed by her lateness, shows with her whole appearance that she is ready to fall into line. Their gazes flicker over the weapons, Rachel Demura's elegant S-class spear, and Leon's surprisingly light weapon, which doesn't escape the attentive Abel von Nibelung. The defender, catching a curious glance, frowned irritably, not allowing any unnecessary questions. Sage Media Poison, enjoying the moment, lifts the veil of secrecy. The seemingly inconspicuous object is a powerful S-class healing artifact which greatly surprises Abel. This rarest treasure, whose power does not depend on its outer form but only on its true essence, raises a silent question. Abel von Nibelung, trying to get a closer look at the curiosity, encounters a sharp rebuff from the defender, who does not want to disturb his peace. Suddenly, the general chatter is interrupted by a loud announcement. The midterm exam for the first-year students of 2034 begins. The stern instructor, looking over the crowd, says parting words, foreshadowing the imminent start of the tests. He warns that they are still students, not heroes, and urges them to retreat at the first serious threat. Life is more important than any assessment, and in case of injuries, one should immediately contact healers, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. Abel von Nibelung, with the confidence of a leader, calls on his team to prepare, promising only one thing: to give it their all. His gaze is firm, there is a deep concentration in it, the moment of truth for which he has been preparing has arrived. But then he notices Kankama's worried face, who seemed to be tormented by something. She shares her disturbing premonition: mermaids may be encountered in their area, despite all the assurances. Abel von Nibelung, trying to dispel her fears, reminds her of the safety measures taken by the teachers, but a slight uneasiness still remains. And so, under the categorical call to take their positions, the students prepare to plunge into the unknown, where even a fragile truce with demons cannot completely silence ancient fears. Abel von Nibelung, as if guided by an invisible force, directs Kama, calling for Chloe Auditor to follow them, and the response is visible in her eyes. And although an inner voice whispers to Kama about the need to remain calm, self-confidence is mixed with slight confusion. Like harbingers of a storm, the students step forward, their footsteps echoing in the growing silence, their blades already sensing the coming battle. Suddenly, Kama, as if awakening from a deep trance, raises his sword, and a clear look of concern appears on Abel von Nibelung's face. Her red eyes, glowing with alarm, reflect the digital static, as if the very space around them is beginning to crumble. Abel von Nibelung's gaze darts between cracking reality and sage media poison as the realization of their complete lack of connection with their teachers hits them. Behind the distorted image of Rachel Demora, one can hear a desperate question. Why did this chaos come so suddenly, without warning? From the pitch darkness, like a harbinger of another world, an ominous pink glow begins to break through, enveloping everything around. And now, enveloped in a whirlwind of purple and blue energies, a vague but terrifying figure materializes from the shadows. The students, their backs to the source of the thread, form a single line in front of this ominous pillar of light, their fate hanging in the air. Suddenly, the scene changes: a hot beach, spreading palm trees, and from Rachel Demora's throat comes a muffled boo, foreshadowing the worst. While Abel von Nibelung and Kama stand relatively calmly, Sage Media Poison and Chloe Auditern are doubled over with nausea, unable to contain the urge. Abel von Nibelung turns with mild surprise to Kama, who seems completely unharmed, and she replies that she does not usually feel sick. But this is only a prelude. From the darkness of the tropical forest appears a strange, small creature resembling a fish on legs, emitting a shrill quack. Abel von Nibelung's face is one of utter bewilderment, his eyes wide open at the absurdity of this first enemy. The bizarre monster fish, making strange sounds, rushes away, leaving Abel von Nibelung to ponder its unexpectedly tiny size. Clutching the blade in his hand, Abel von Nibelung says thoughtfully that for such creatures, their powerful weapons may even be superfluous. However, he immediately adds that, at their true destination, they will encounter much more formidable, adult specimens that will not be so tiny. To back up his point, he notes that the point system does not always reflect the physical size of the creatures, and immediately sends Chloe the Auditor on reconnaissance. Under the cover of dense forest, the group ventures deeper into the thicket, with Chloe the Auditor, spear in hand, leading the way. The tension mounts, and one of the fighters warns, "Be careful," while Abel von Nibelung looks around carefully. Suddenly, Abel's gaze is pierced by something invisible, and the air around him seems to thicken, foreshadowing a hidden threat. Finally, the team reaches their destination, a mysterious island where the commander confirms that they are there. But as soon as they set foot on the ground, a swift shadow flashes overhead. It is Kama, using his unique abilities, silently moving along the treetops. Surprised by her maneuver, Abel von Nibelung asks about the meaning of such a move, to which Kama explains the effectiveness of stealth. The commander, with a barely noticeable smile, turns to her, expecting to receive the first information about the state of the territory. However, Kama's face takes on a serious expression, and she begins her report with a hesitant, "Well, foreshadowing difficulties." She points to a massive rock formation that hides the entrance to the underworld, confirming that this is where their target lies. Deep in the pitch-black cave, dozens of glowing eyes begin to flicker, filling the air with an ominous buzz. Eerie fish-like creatures with huge eyes gather around some primordial fire, as if conducting their dark ritual. The crew realizes the scale of the threat. The commander asks again if there really are 50 or 60 of them, and a note of concern can be heard in his voice. Abel von Nibelung peers into the darkness, his eyes full of determination and cold calculation. The companions stand still in anticipation, their thoughts turning to their commander, wondering what decision he will make in the face of such superior numbers of enemies. The commander, as if playing chess, moves a piece, once again confirming Chloe Auditor will handle reconnaissance and Vapon will be responsible for protecting and strengthening the squad. Khan Kama, although he expresses slight confusion about the distribution of tasks, immediately proudly declares his heroic duty to help others. Abel von Nibelung looks intently at Khan Kama, his gaze revealing a deep understanding of her passionate nature. The commander appoints another soldier responsible for covering the rear, and he accepts this role with joy, almost childish delight. Holding the White King confidently in his hand, the commander declares that he will lead the vanguard without the slightest hesitation and is ready to personally rush into battle. At this point, Sage Media Poison, with a sly smile, asks her question, wondering what role is in store for her. The commander turns to Rachel Demura and, looking at her with a penetrating gaze, begins his sentence, full of hidden meaning. Abel von Nibelung, focused and serious, realizes to himself, Leon has made a decision. At the same time, as if anticipating fate, Sage Media Poison is already rushing into the thick of things. Her weapon glows golden, charging with destructive energy. With a swift blow, she falls upon the enemy, leaving behind only a shimmering trail. A powerful explosion shakes the space, and small monsters fly apart. But the monsters, as if stunned, only looked questioningly at the sudden blow. Sage, gracefully floating in the air, prepares for the next attack, her eyes blazing with excitement. It seemed that even her spear, stuck into the ground, could not keep up with this mad dance of death. A sinister smile crosses Sage's face as she draws her fearsome weapon again, and here she is, in the thick of the battle, turning into a whirlwind of pure destruction. And at headquarters, the words addressed to Rachel Demura are finally heard. Your task. The commander, Kling Siegfried von Nibelung, challenges her with a slight grin. Crush everything. Can you handle it? Sage Media Poison, as if hearing this challenge from another dimension, raises her spear, her eyes shining with confidence. Of course. Elsewhere, someone's hands grip tightly, a shaft shrouded in a mystical green glow. Suddenly, a voice is heard and a powerful blessing envelops the area, confusing everyone around. The monsters, as if having lost count, are confused and trying to comprehend what is happening. But Sage remains vigilant, continuing her furious attack, counting down the fallen enemies. With each new blow, the number of those defeated grows, and her movements acquire a deadly rhythm. Vapin, thank you for your protection. Sage looks around with satisfaction, reporting 25 fallen monsters. Abel, Rachel, and Konkama watch the disappearing figure with surprise, and a mysterious voice utters only a short "bye, aye." A crimson light flashes from the darkness, heralding the blessing of the cat, an ancient power about to be unleashed upon the world. Konkama, whose scarlet eyes glow with determination, tightly grips the blade, surrounded by a halo of mystical energy. She throws herself into the abyss, cutting through the ranks of the vile creatures of darkness with one swift blow, and they crumble into dust. By uttering just one word, she records the number of fallen enemies, reaching the mark of 8. A new threat emerges from the depths, a pair of gigantic creatures like monstrous fish, rushing straight towards her. Her sword flashes, and once again she mentally marks a new number in her deadly count, 10. In the distance, in the haze of battle, 2 more figures merge in a whirlwind of elements, their attacks fiery and swift. Their combined efforts quickly multiply the number of fallen creatures, and already 45 enemies have been defeated. Abel von Nibelung and his companion, watching from afar, cannot hide their amazement. Their gazes are full of silent questioning. Images flash through my mind, revealing an unexpected confrontation, foreshadowing an inevitable meeting. Could it be? Sage Media Poison, with a smirk, and a focused Konkama, both have their weapons at the ready, preparing for another round. Their combined might crashes down on the giant monster, tearing apart space with a whirlwind of flame and light. The monster, with its mouth open, retreats, while the 2 girls, like predators, prepare for the final blow. The blades clash, releasing blinding sparks, each blow filled with furious determination. Horror distorts the monster's face, its eyes fill with fear of imminent death. The coordinated, devastating blows of Sage and Konkama shatter the creature, filling the air with echoes of their power. Sage notes Konkama's increased speed with a sly grin, but she, unwilling to give in, asserts her right to the defeated monster. The tension between them mounts, and Konkama, without holding back, addresses her rival with a cheeky nickname. The observer, shocked by what he saw, breathes a sigh of relief, whispering words of gratitude to the higher powers. Abel von Nibelung, as if awakened, draws his sword, his eyes reflecting not only alarm but also readiness for action. The The companion cannot help but ask if Abel was uneasy, to which he, slightly embarrassed, reluctantly admits his fears. After a difficult battle that claimed the lives of 60 monsters, tension among the survivors only grew. One of them, Leon, suggests moving on, but Abel cannot shake off the feeling of impending disaster. As Leon makes his move with a slight smile, as if in a game of chess, Abel feels that this is only the beginning. His gaze pierces the darkness, trying to unravel true intentions and hidden threats. Deep down, he already knows that something is wrong, and this game could be deadly. Suddenly, Leon, struck by a bright beam, falls into the abyss, and this treacherous attack stuns everyone. Konkama, Sage Media Poison, and the rest of the students are horrified to realize the scale of what has happened. Horror grips Abel as his gaze turns to the blurry silhouette in the distance. But then his eyes widen even more as something made of pure power rises from the depths. The ancient force approaching them makes everyone freeze, and someone's desperate cry of "Leon" only increases the panic. A menacing mermaid appears before them, her body pulsating with an ominous purple light and her eyes emitting a deadly threat. Sage Media Poison can't believe their eyes. Where did the mermaid come from? After all, they were told these creatures had long since been defeated. Abel understands that now they must make the most important choice: run while there is a chance, or fight the unknown threat. Chloe Auditor, despite her fear, desperately tries to contact the teachers, but the connection is cut off, leaving them alone with the monster. Abel, gritting his teeth, sees how panic begins to grip his comrades. Sage Media Poison, showing leadership qualities, orders Rachel Demora to stop the approaching sea monsters and another student to bring Leon back to his senses. Konkama, clutching his katana tightly, looks at Chloe, whose confusion is growing with each passing second. Abel, taking the initiative, instructs Konkama to find a way out and re-establish contact with the teachers. Realizing the criticality of the situation, Konkama decisively answers yes, ready to carry out the order. And so, Konkama, overcoming obstacles, swiftly rushes away, leaving behind the battle and the hope of salvation. As Konkama hurries away, Rachel Demura and Sage Media Poison, overcome with panic, call out for the disappearing Abel. But Abel von Nibelung moves silently towards the source of energy, his back turned to his comrades, foreshadowing a daring and dangerous plan. His face, hidden in shadow, expresses deep concentration, composure before the inevitable test. And so, with a wicked smile and blades shining with a mysterious light, Abel von Nibelung stands ready to meet the enemy, while his allies are stunned by this sudden determination. His body radiates an unearthly glow, as if heralding the appearance of a big fish worthy of his attention. Abel von Nibelung's gaze is full of anticipation of battle, and his determination is a harbinger of things to come. Images of a past battle flash through his mind, where a mighty warrior easily defeated his enemy. After all, catching such a powerful mage in the game alone seemed unthinkable. A whole group was required. Chaos rages all around, and the scale of despair that has gripped them is beyond words. At this moment, Abel von Nibelung plunges into silent reflection, his gaze becoming even more penetrating. The true form of the enemy appears before him, a vile monster radiating ominous energy. With two shining blades in hand, Abel von Nibelung declares his readiness to crush this beast within 40 seconds of his blessing. A dangerous smile plays on his face, for the time has come for the decisive blow, turning the enemy into quality sashimi. At the same time, Sage Media Poison, with incredible energy, rushes into battle, attacking an invisible target. In front of her is a fish-like monster with a gaping mouth, emitting a terrifying scream. Sage Media Poison, with a grimace of pain and despair, tries to tear his weapon from the monster's death grip. Gathering his last strength, Sage Media Poison violently pushes back the massive monster, but the fight seems endless. Her eyes glow with determination, and her weapon flashes with rainbow light as Sage Media Poison shouts the order, "Get out!" Sage Media Poison's crushing blow sends the monster flying, her scream echoing across the battlefield, "G-E-E-Tay out of here!" Exhausted but victorious, Sage Media Poison catches her breath, her face showing the exhaustion of a hard fight. On that same battlefield, amidst the chaos, Konkama felt an agonizing sense of helplessness, wanting to help those who were desperately fighting. But Abel von Nibelung's internal wounds, exhausted by his recent healing, did not allow him to enter the battle at full strength. Konkama watched the scene unfold, remembering their past battles and understanding the full power of the ancient enemy. A terrifying figure, woven from darkness and ancient magic, loomed before Abel von Nibelung, ready for a new round of battle. Desperate thoughts tormented Konkama. She saw how each attack broke Abel, and she fought the urge to intervene. The monster seemed to be merely reveling in the pain, its predatory grin glowing with an ominous purple light. Abel von Nibelung, despite the pain, dodged the deadly blows, his blades flashing in the blue light. An unbending will burned in his eyes, promising to fight to the very end, even at the cost of his own life. But they are still mortal, a voice inside him whispered, urging him to a reckless dash. All he had to do was close the distance to deliver the decisive blow to the most vulnerable point. He was already very close, deadly blades ready to pierce the target, when the monster prepared for a counterattack. An explosion of energy marked their collision, and the world stood still for a moment, awaiting the outcome. But the monster responded with no less force, throwing Abel von Nibelung back with a powerful stream of magical energy. Khan Kama watched in horror as Abel flew back, the monster's face contorted in sudden pain. Roaring with rage, the wounded monster gathered all its strength for a new, crushing blow. Abel von Nibelung slipped away from the attack like a shadow, using his momentum to make a new, swift maneuver. He landed, his body shaking with exhaustion, but his eyes remained full of fierce determination. Too weak flashed through his thoughts, the realization of his mistake burning with the bitterness of defeat. With renewed vigor, as if rising from the ashes, he rushed upward to correct his mistake. This vile mermaid, thought Abel von Nibelung, trying to anticipate the monster's next unpredictable move. Abel is tense, but behind his angry expression there is something else. He is trying to contain his destructive power. Nearby, like a conductor of chaos, stood a stranger with a flute, and next to him, unconscious, lay another fighter. The body of the fallen fighter shimmered with a strange light as some process took over him. Abel, still on guard, asks with a slight grin if everything is okay. Surprised, the guy with the flute only confirms that he is fine, although his look reveals something more. "Then I rely on you," Abel whispered, rushing into battle with the indomitable determination of a hero. The red silhouette of Abel diving into shadow boxing makes the stranger freeze in deep thought. A bead of sweat runs down his temple, reflecting the tension of the moment and the depth of his emotions. "This is fucking awesome," the stranger exclaims, looking at Abel with undisguised admiration. His words are a hymn to courage and self-sacrifice, capable of turning any despair into a flame of hope. He admits that, even while studying at an elite hero academy, he had never seen such qualities in real life. But in this group, it seems he has finally found that spark that can ignite a true hero. So he personally invited Rachel DeMora to join the team, valuing her ability to heal and perhaps something more. And now he is finally looking forward to seeing a real hero in action, hoping that this moment will change everything. Abel von Nibelung, watching him, mentally confirms he is right. However, his passionate monologue is interrupted when, although he admires the strength, he directly tells Abel that he is still far from true heroism. But then his expression changes, as if sensing an impending threat, and he looks into the distance. The monster, spewing out clots of pure energy, unleashes a barrage of devastating attacks on the battlefield. A multitude of purple projectiles, resembling predatory fish, rush towards the target at incredible speed. Abel, deftly dodging in the air, avoids the deadly blows, continuing his desperate fight. Abel, despite his desperate onslaught, feels that his opponent is still not showing his full strength. But an inner premonition whispers to him anxiously about the real threat. And here it is, the true manifestation of the enemy, his essence, blazing with furious power. Abel continues his deadly dance among flying debris and streams of energy. Every movement is a honed survival instinct, an evasion of blades that cut the very air. His gaze is as sharp as the steel of the blades in his hands, every muscle tense, preparing for the decisive lunge. The sinister entity seems to stretch its clawed limbs, preparing to devour everything around it. The smile on her face twists in anticipation as the forces of evil begin to gather into a single blow. Letting out a piercing scream, she releases a wave of destructive energy. Sage Media's Poison and Kankama are watching in shock as they realize that this battle has gone beyond the ordinary. Colossal energy condenses into a shining cross, a harbinger of a crushing blow. Kankama, enlightened by the terrifying truth, realizes her fatal role in what is happening. Abel falls, but even in flight he does not give up, striving to break through the curtain of magical attack. He screams with all his might, calling for Khan Kamu to wake up, because the blow only reached the shell. The creature groans in pain, its form distorting under the onslaught, but the attacking cross continues its deadly path. The blast wave shakes the space when the blow reaches its target, tearing the air apart. A powerful burst of energy pierces the horizon, leaving behind only the echo of destruction. Rage distorts the monster's features. His eyes blaze with hatred, and his body is ready for another outbreak. In response to the pain, it releases another furious stream of energy, seeking to destroy everything in its path. In the distance, Rachel Demora and other onlookers are stunned by what they see, realizing the scale of the disaster. While Rachel is aware of the horror, other students, including Chloe the auditor, also feel a strange vibration and hear a dull thud that foreshadows trouble. Suddenly, the first drops of rain fall from the sky, like the tears of a world mourning its coming destruction. Chloe tries to calm her fear by calling for help for the wounded and rationalizing what she saw as a normal lightning strike, but there is uncertainty in her voice. Abel von Nibelung's distant but determined voice cuts through the air. "We need to get back to the academy." But it was too late. The dome that protected them could not withstand the pressure, cracked, and water gushed through the cracks. Amid the rubble, under the streams of rain, stand two students, their faces reflecting confusion and horror. Even the monsters that inhabited these dungeons were gripped by panic, their primitive fear visible in their wide-open eyes. Sage Media Poison, usually so unflappable, looks at the running creatures with confusion, wondering, are they running away? A vast expanse of rain-drenched, ruined landscape transforms into an arena where four fighters stand by a mysterious, glowing pool. Abel von Nibelung, clutching his knife, curses his distraction, realizing that the monsters are fleeing not from fear of death, but from the destruction of their refuge. At that moment, the ground beneath our feet shakes, and a new, blinding stream of purple energy bursts forth from its depths. A dangerous grin appears on Abel's face, and a fire of determination lights up in his eyes, foreshadowing a brutal fight. Without hesitation, Abel leaps forward, his blades piercing the air as he rushes towards the invisible threat shrouded in darkness. Sage, coldly assessing the situation, gives orders, leaving less significant opponents to her allies. Her partner, although frightened, nods in response, preparing to carry out the task. He looks at Kan Kamu, who seems to be standing alone against the mermaid, and realizes that this moment, madness or heroism, will forever go down in history. 10 seconds left, Abel's voice rings out like a death sentence, his eyes burning with a thirst for battle. "Well, shall we begin?" The monstrous mermaid, twisted with rage, lets out a piercing scream, her eyes blazing with ancient, indomitable power. She dives down, shrouded in dark energies, her fall a promise of total destruction. And the bottomless abyss beneath it seems to be just waiting to swallow up anything that dares to approach its ominous darkness. But Abel von Nibelung does not flinch. He looks into this abyss, and his call sounds like a challenge promising a fight. "Come to me." His entire will is gathered into a single nerve knot. Every cell of his body is penetrated by unbearable tension. And then, through the pain and concentration, his gaze flares with an icy blue flame, signifying the awakening of inhuman strength. Now he is not just a man, but rage incarnate, rushing into the darkness with blades that shine like meteors in the night.